Story number 19 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Old Father Christmas by J. H. Ewing. The custom of Christmas trees came from Germany. I can remember when they were first introduced into England, and what wonderful things we thought them. Now every village school has its tree, and the scholars openly discuss whether the presents have been good or mean as compared with other trees in former years. The first one that I ever saw I believe to have come from good Father Christmas himself, but little boys have grown too wise now to be taken in for their own amusement. They are not excited by secret and mysterious preparations in the back drawing-room. They hardly confess to the thrill, which I feel to this day, when the folding doors are thrown open, and amid the blaze of tapers, mamma, like a fate, advances with her scissors to give every one what falls to his lot. Well, young people, when I was 8 years old, I had not seen a Christmas tree, and the first picture of one I ever saw was the picture of that held by old Father Christmas in my godmother's picture book. "What are those things on the tree?" I asked. "Candles," said my father. "No, father, not the candles, the other things." "Those are toys, my son." "Are they ever taken off?" "Yes, they are taken off and given to the children who stand around the tree." Patty and I grasped each other by the hand, and with one voice murmured, "How kind of old Father Christmas!" By and by I asked, "How old is Father Christmas?" My father laughed and said, 1,830 years, child, which was then the year of our Lord, and thus 1,830 years since the first great Christmas day. "He looks very old," whispered Patty. And I, who was for my age what Kitty called Bible learned, said thoughtfully, and with some puzzledness of mind, "Then he's older than Methuselah." But my father had left the room, and did not hear my difficulty. November and December went by, and still the picture book kept all its charm for Patty and me, and we pondered on and loved old Father Christmas as children can love and realize a fancy friend. To those who remember the fancies of their childhood, I need say no more. Christmas week came. Christmas Eve came. My father and mother were mysteriously and unaccountably busy in the parlor. We had only one parlor, and Patty and I were not allowed to go in. We went into the kitchen, but even here was no place of rest for us. Kitty was all over the place, as she phrased it, and cakes, mince pies, and puddings were with her. As she justly observed, there was no place there for children and books to sit with their toes in the fire, when a body wanted to be at the oven all along. The cat was enough for her temper, she added. As to Puss, who obstinately refused to take a hint which drove her out into the Christmas frost, she returned again and again with soft steps and a stupidity that was, I think, affected to the warm hearth, only to fly at intervals like a football before Kitty's hasty slipper. We had more sense, or less courage. We bowed to Kitty's behests and went to the back door. Patty and I were hardy children, and accustomed to run out in all weathers without much extra wrapping up. We put Kitty's shawl over our two heads and went outside. I rather hoped to see something of Dick, for it was holiday time, but no Dick passed. He was busy helping his father to bore holes in the carved seats of the church, which were to hold sprigs of holly for the morrow. That was the idea of church decoration in my young days. You have improved on your elders there, young people, and I am candid enough to allow it. Still, the sprigs of red and green were better than nothing, and, like your lovely wreaths and pious devices, they made one feel as if the old black wood were bursting into life and leaf again for very Christmas joy, and, if only one knelt carefully, they did not scratch his nose. Well, Dick was busy and not to be seen. We ran across a little yard and looked over the wall at the end to see if we could see anything or anybody. From this point there was a pleasant meadow field sloping prettily away to a little hill about 3/4 of a mile distant, which, catching some fine breezes from the moors beyond, was held to be a place of cure for whooping cough, or kin cough as it was vulgarly called. Up to the top of this Kitty had dragged me and carried Patty when we were recovering from the complaint, as I well remember. It was the only change of air we could afford, and I dare say it did as well as if we had gone into badly drained lodgings at the seaside. This hill was now covered with snow, and stood off against the grey sky. The white fields looked vast and dreary in the dusk. The only gay thing to be seen were the berries on the holly hedge in the little lane, which, running by the end of our back yard, led up to the Hall, and the fat robin that was staring at me. I was looking at the robin when Patty, who had been peering out of her corner of Kitty's shawl, gave a great jump that dragged the shawl from our heads, and cried, "Look!" I looked. An old man was coming along the lane. His hair and beard were as white as cotton wool. He had a face like the sort of apple that keeps well in winter. His coat was old and brown. There was snow about him in patches, and he carried a small fir tree. The same conviction seized upon us both. With one breath we exclaimed, "It's old Father Christmas!" I know now that it was only an old man of the place, with whom we did not happen to be acquainted, and that he was taking a little fir tree up to the Hall to be made into a Christmas tree. He was a very good-humoured old fellow, and rather deaf, for which he made up by smiling and nodding his head a good deal, and saying "Ay, ay, to be sure," at likely intervals. As he passed us and met our earnest gaze, he smiled and nodded so earnestly that I was bold enough to cry, "Good evening, Father Christmas." "Same to you," said he, in a high-pitched voice. "Then you are Father Christmas," said Patty. "And a Happy New Year," was Father Christmas's reply, which rather put me out. But he smiled in such a satisfactory manner that Patty went on, "You're very old, aren't you?" "So I be, miss, so I be," said Father Christmas, nodding. "Father says you're 1830 years old," I muttered. "Ay, ay, to be sure," said Father Christmas. "I'm a long age." "A very long age," thought I, and I added, "You're nearly twice as old as Methuselah, you know," thinking that this might have struck him. "Ay, ay," said Father Christmas, but he did not seem to think anything of it. After a pause he held up the tree and cried, "Do you know what this is, little miss?" "A Christmas tree?" said Patty, and the old man smiled and nodded. I leaned over the wall and shouted, "But there are no candles." "By and by," said Father Christmas, nodding as before. "When it's dark they'll all be lighted up. That'll be a fine sight." "Toys, too, there'll be, won't there?" said Patty. Father Christmas nodded his head. "And sweeties," he added expressively. I could feel Patty trembling, and my own heart beat fast. The thought which agitated us both was this: was Father Christmas bringing the tree to us? But very anxiety, and some modesty also, kept us from asking outright. Only when the old man shouldered his tree and prepared to move on, I cried in despair, "Oh, are you going?" "I'm coming back by and by," said he. "How soon?" cried Patty. "About 4 o'clock," said the old man, smiling. "I'm only going up yonder." Up yonder? This puzzled us. Father Christmas had pointed, but so indefinitely that he might have been pointing to the sky, or the fields, or the little wood at the end of the squire's grounds. I thought the latter, and suggested to Patty that perhaps he had some place underground like Aladdin's cave, where he got the candles and all the pretty things for the tree. This idea pleased us both, and we amused ourselves by wondering what old Father Christmas would choose for us from his stores in the wonderful hole where he dressed his Christmas trees. "I wonder, Patty," said I, "why there's no picture of Father Christmas's dog in the book." For at the old man's heels in the lane there crept a little brown and white spaniel, looking very dirty in the snow. "Perhaps it's a new dog that he's got to take care of his cave," said Patty. When we went indoors we examined the picture afresh by the dim light from the passage window, but there was no dog there. My father passed us at this moment and patted my head. "Father," said I don't know, but I do think old Father Christmas is going to bring us a Christmas tree tonight." "Who's been telling you that?" said my father. But he passed on before I could explain that we had seen Father Christmas himself, and had had his word for it that he would return at 4 o'clock, and that the candles on his tree would be lighted as soon as it was dark. We hovered on the outskirts of the rooms till 4 o'clock came. We sat on the stairs and watched the big clock, which I was just learning to read, and Patty made herself giddy with constantly looking up and counting the 4 strokes, toward which the hour hand slowly moved. We put our noses into the kitchen now and then, to smell the cakes and get warm, and anon we hung about the parlour door, and were most unjustly accused of trying to peep. What did we care what our mother was doing in the parlour, we who had seen Father Christmas himself, and were expecting him back again every moment? At last the church clock struck. The sounds boomed heavily through the frost, and Patty thought there were 4 of them. Then, after due choking and worrying, our own clock struck, and we counted the strokes quite clearly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we got Kitty's shawl once more, and stole out into the back yard. We ran to our old place and peeped, but could see nothing. "We'd better get up on to the wall," I said, and with some difficulty and distress, from rubbing her bare knees against the cold stone, and getting the snow up her sleeves, Patty got on to the coping of the little wall. I was just struggling after her, when something warm and something cold coming suddenly against the bare calves of my legs made me shriek with fright. I came down with a run and bruised my knees, my elbows, and my chin, and the snow that hadn't gone up Patty's sleeves went down my neck. Then I found that the cold thing was a dog's nose, and the warm thing was his tongue, and Patty cried from her post of observation, "It's Father Christmas's dog, and he's licking your legs." It really was the dirty little brown and white spaniel, and he persisted in licking me, and jumping on me, and making curious little noises, that must have meant something if one had known his language. I was rather harassed at the moment. My legs were sore, I was a little afraid of the dog, and Patty was very much afraid of sitting on the wall without me. "You won't fall," I said to her. "Get down, will you?" I said to the dog. "Humpty Dumpty fell off a wall," said Patty. "Bow wow," said the dog. I pulled Patty down, and the dog tried to pull me down, but when my little sister was on her feet, to my relief, he transferred his attentions to her. When he had jumped at her and licked her several times, he turned around and ran away. "He's gone," said I. "I'm so glad." But even as I spoke, he was back again, crouching at Patty's feet and glaring at her with eyes the colour of his ears. Now Patty was very fond of animals, and when the dog looked at her, she looked at the dog, and then she said to me, "He wants us to go with him." On which, as if he understood our language, though we were ignorant of his, the spaniel sprang away, and went off as hard as he could, and Patty and I went after him, a dim hope crossing my mind. Perhaps Father Christmas had sent him for us. The idea was rather favoured by the fact he led us up the lane, only a little way, then he stopped by something lying in the ditch, and once more we cried in the same breath, "It's old Father Christmas!" Returning from the hall, the old man had slipped upon a bit of ice, and lay stunned in the snow. Patty began to cry. "I think he's dead," she sobbed. "He is so very old, I don't wonder," I murmured. "But perhaps he's not. I'll fetch father." My father and Kitty were soon on the spot. Kitty was as strong as a man, and they carried Father Christmas between them into the kitchen. There he quickly revived. I must do Kitty the justice to say that she did not utter a word of complaint at the disturbance of her labours, and that she drew the old man's chair close up to the oven with her own hand. She was so much affected by the behaviour of his dog that she admitted him even to the hearth, on which Puss, being acute enough to see how matters stood, lay down with her back so close to the spaniel's that Kitty could not expel one without kicking both. For our parts, we felt sadly anxious about the tree. Otherwise, we could have wished for no better treat than to sit at Kitty's round table, taking tea with Father Christmas. Our usual fare of thick bread and treacle was to-night exchanged for a delicious variety of cakes, which were none the worse to us for being tasters and wasters, that is, little bits of dough or shortbread put in to try the state of the oven, and certain cakes that had got broken or burnt in the baking. Well, there we sat, helping old Father Christmas to tea and cake, and wondering in our hearts what could have become of the tree. Patty and I felt a delicacy in asking Old Father Christmas about the tree. It was not until we had had tea 3 times round, with tasters and wasters to match, that Patty said very gently, "It's quite dark now," and then she heaved a deep sigh. Burning anxiety overcame me. I leaned toward Father Christmas and shouted. I had found out that it was needless to shout. "I suppose the candles are on the tree now?" "Just about putting of 'em on," said Father Christmas. "And the presents, too?" said Patty. "Ay, ay, to be sure," said Father Christmas, and he smiled delightfully. I was thinking what further questions I might venture upon, when he pushed his cup toward Patty, saying, "Since you are so pressing, miss, I'll take another dish." And Kitty, swooping on us from the oven, cried, "Make yourself at home, sir. There's more where these came from. Make a long arm, Miss Patty, and hand them cakes." So we had to devote ourselves to the duties of the table, and Patty, holding the lid with one hand and pouring with the other, supplied Father Christmas's wants with a heavy heart. At last he was satisfied. I said grace, during which he stood, and indeed he stood for some time afterward with his eyes shut. I fancy under the impression that I was still speaking. He had just said a fervent Amen, and reseated himself, when my father put his head into the kitchen and made this remarkable statement: "Old Father Christmas has sent a tree to the young people." Patty and I uttered a cry of delight, and we forthwith danced round the old man, saying, "How nice! Oh, how kind of you!" which I think must have bewildered him, but he only smiled and nodded. "Come along," said my father. "Come, children. Come, Reuben. Come, Kitty." And he went into the parlour, and we all followed him. My godmother's picture of a Christmas tree was very pretty, and the flames of the candles were so naturally done in red and yellow that I always wondered that they did not shine at night. But the picture was nothing to the reality. We had been sitting almost in the dark, for, as Kitty said, firelight was quite enough to burn at meal times, and when the parlour door was thrown open, and the tree, with lighted tapers on all the branches, burst upon our view, the blaze was dazzling, and threw such a glory round the little gifts, and the bags of coloured muslin with acid drops and pink rose drops and comfits inside, as I shall never forget. We all got something, and Patty and I, at any rate, believed that the things came from the stores of Old Father Christmas. We were not undeceived even by his gratefully accepting a bundle of old clothes which had been hastily put together to form his present. We were all very happy, even Kitty, I think, though she kept her sleeves rolled up, and seemed rather to grudge enjoying herself, a weak point in some energetic characters. She went back to her oven before the lights were out and the angel on the top of the tree taken down. She locked up her present, a little work-box, at once. She often showed it off afterward, but it was kept in the same bit of tissue paper till she died. Our present certainly did not last so long. The old man died about a week afterward, so we never made his acquaintance as a common personage. When he was buried, his little dog came to us. I suppose he remembered the hospitality he had received. Patty adopted him, and he was very faithful. Puss always looked on him with favour. I hoped during our rambles together in the following summer that he would lead us at last to the cave where Christmas trees are dressed, but he never did. Our parents often spoke of his late master as old Reuben, but children are not easily disabused of a favourite fancy, and in Patty's thoughts and in mine the old man was long gratefully remembered as Old Father Christmas. End of Old Father Christmas by J.H. Ewing. Story number 20 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. A Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and feebly cried, "Hooray!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness, were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits, in particular, were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough? Suppose it should break in turning out? Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it, while they were merry with the goose? A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hallo! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house, and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannon ball, so hard and firm, blazing in half and half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glasses, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. End of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Story number 21 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. How Christmas Came to the Santa Maria Flats by Ilya W. Peedy. There were 26 flat children, and none of them had ever been flat children until that year. Previously they had all been home children, and as such had, of course, had beautiful Christmases, in which their relations with Santa Claus had been of the most intimate and personal nature. Now, owing to their residence in the Santa Maria flats, and the lease, all was changed. The lease was a strange forbiddance, a ukase issued by a tyrant, which took from children their natural liberties and rights; though, to be sure, as every one of the flat children knew, they were in the greatest kind of luck to be allowed to live at all, and especially were they fortunate past the lot of children to be permitted to live in a flat. There were many flats in the great city, so polished and carved and burnished and belacquered that children were not allowed to enter within the portals, save on visits of ceremony in charge of parents or governesses; and in one flat, where Cecil de Koven le Baron was born, just by accident and without intending any harm, he was evicted, along with his parents, by the time he reached the age where he seemed likely to be graduated from the go-cart; and yet that flat had not nearly so imposing a name as the Santa Maria. The 26 children of the Santa Maria flats belonged to 20 families. All of these 20 families were peculiar, as you might learn any day by interviewing the families concerning one another, but they bore with each other's peculiarities quite cheerfully, and spoke in the hall when they met. Sometimes this tolerance would even extend to conversation about the janitor, a thin creature who did the work of 5 men. The ladies complained that he never smiled. "I wouldn't so much mind the hot water pipes leaking now and then," the ladies would remark in the vestibule, rustling their skirts to show that they wore silk petticoats, "if only the janitor would smile. But he looks like a cemetery." "I know it," would be the response. "I told Mr. Wilberforce last night that if he would only get a cheerful janitor I wouldn't mind our having rubber instead of Axminster on the stairs. You know we were promised Axminster when we moved in," would be the plaintive response. The ladies would stand together for a moment, wrapped in gloomy reflection, and then part. The kitchen and nursemaids felt on the subject too. "If Carl Carlson would only smile," they used to exclaim in sibilant whispers, as they passed on the way to the laundry. "If he'd come in and joke while we was washin'." Only Kara Johnson never said anything on the subject, because she knew why Carlson didn't smile, and was sorry for it, and would have made it all right if it hadn't been for Lars Larson. Dear, dear, but this is a digression from the subject of the lease. That terrible document was held over the heads of the children as the Herodian pronunciamiento concerning small boys was over the heads of the Israelites. It was in the lease not to run, not to jump, not to yell. It was in the lease not to sing in the halls, not to call from story to story, not to slide down the banisters; and there were blocks of banisters, so smooth and wide and beautiful that the attraction between them and the seats of the little boys' trousers was like the attraction of a magnet for a nail. Yet not a leg, crooked or straight, fat or thin, was ever to be thrown over those polished surfaces. It was in the lease, too, that no peddler or agent or suspicious stranger was to enter the Santa Maria, neither by the front door nor the back. The janitor stood in his uniform at the rear, and the lackey in his uniform at the front, to prevent any such intrusion upon the privacy of the aristocratic Santa Marias. The lackey, who politely directed people, and summoned elevators, and whistled up tubes, and rang bells, thus conducting the complex social life of those favoured apartments, was not one to make a mistake, and admit any person not calculated to ornament the front parlours of the flatters. It was this that worried the children, for how could such a dear, disorderly, democratic rascal as a children's saint ever hope to gain a pass to that exclusive entrance and get up to the rooms of the flat children? "You can see for yourself," said Ernest, who lived on the first floor, to Roderick, who lived on the fourth, "that if Santa Claus can't get up the front stairs and can't get up the back stairs, that all he can do is to come down the chimney. And he can't come down the chimney; at least, he can't get out of the fireplace." "Why not?" asked Roderick, who was busy with an all-day sucker, and not inclined to take a gloomy view of anything. "Goosey!" cried Ernest in great disdain. "I'll show you." And he led Roderick with his sucker right into the best parlour, where the fireplace was, and showed him an awful thing. Of course, to the ordinary observer, there was nothing awful about the fireplace. Everything in the way of bric a brac possessed by the Santa Maria Flatters was artistic. It may have been in the lease that only people with aesthetic tastes were to be admitted to the apartments. However that may be, the fireplace, with its vases and pictures and trinkets, was something quite wonderful. Indian incense burned in a mysterious little dish. Pictures of purple ladies were hung in odd corners. Calendars and letters nobody could read served to decorate, if not to educate, and glass vases of strange colours and extraordinary shapes stood about filled with roses. None of these things were awful, at least no one would have dared say they were, but what was awful was the formation of the granite. It was not a hospitable place with andirons, where noble logs of wood could be laid for the burning, nor did it have a generous iron basket where honest anthracite could glow away into the nights. Not a bit of it. It held a vertical plate of stuff that looked like dirty cotton wool, on which a tiny blue flame leaped when the gas was turned on and ignited. "You can see for yourself," said Ernest tragically. Roderick could see for himself. There was an inch-wide opening down which the friend of the children could squeeze himself, and, as everybody knows, he needs a good deal of room now, for he has grown portly with age, and his pack every year becomes bigger, owing to the ever-increasing number of girls and boys he has to supply. "Jiminy!" said Roderick, and dropped his all-day sucker on the old Bokhara rug that Ernest's mamma had bought the week before at a fashionable furnishing shop, and which had given the sore throat to all the family, owing to some cunning little germs that had come over with the rug to see what American throats were like. Oh, me, yes! But Roderick could see. Anybody could see, and a boy could see better than anybody. "Let's go see the Telephone Boy," said Roderick. This seemed the wisest thing to do. When in doubt, all the children went to the Telephone Boy, who was the most fascinating person, with knowledge of the most wonderful kind, and of a nature to throw that of Mrs. Scheherazade quite in the shade, which, considering how long that loquacious lady had been a shade, is perhaps not surprising. The Telephone Boy knew the answers to all the conundrums in the world, and a way out of nearly all troubles such as are likely to overtake boys and girls. But now he had no suggestions to offer, and could speak no comfortable words. "He can't get inter de front, and he can't get inter de back, and he can't come down no chimney in dis here house, and I tell yer dose," he said, and shut his mouth grimly, while cold apprehension crept around Ernest's heart and took the sweetness out of Roderick's sucker. Nevertheless, hope springs eternal, and the boys each and individually asked their fathers, tremendously wise and good men, if they thought there was any hope that Santa Claus would get into the Santa Maria Flats, and each of the fathers looked up from his paper and said he'd be blessed if he did. And the words sunk deep and drew the tears when the doors were closed and the soft black was all about, and nobody could laugh because a boy was found crying. The girls cried too, for the awful news was whistled up tubes and whistled down tubes, till all the 26 Flat children knew about it. The next day it was talked over in the brick court, where the children used to go to shout and race, but on this day there was neither shouting nor racing. There was instead a shaking of heads, a surreptitious dropping of tears, a guessing and protesting and lamenting. All the Flat mothers congratulated themselves on the fact that their children were becoming so quiet and orderly, and wondered what could have come over them when they noted that they neglected to run after the patrol wagon as it whizzed round the block. It was decided, after a solemn talk, that every child should go to its own fireplace and investigate. In the event of any fireplace being found with an opening big enough to admit Santa Claus, a note could be left directing him along the halls to the other apartments. A spirit of universal brotherhood had taken possession of the Santa Maria Flatters. Misery bound them together. But the investigation proved to be disheartening. The cruel asbestos grates were everywhere. Hope lay strangled. As time went on, melancholy settled upon the flat children. The parents noted it, and wondered if there could be sewer gas in the apartments. One over anxious mother called in a physician, who gave the poor little child some medicine which made it quite ill. No one suspected the truth, though the children were often heard to say that it was evident that there was to be no Christmas for them. But then, what more natural for a child to say, thus hoping to win protestations, so the mothers reasoned and let the remark pass. The day before Christmas was grey and dismal. There was no wind. Indeed, there was a sort of tightness in the air, as if the supply of freshness had given out. People had headaches. Even the telephone boy was cross, and none of the spirit of the time appeared to enliven the flat children. There appeared to be no stir, no mystery. No whisperings went on in the corners, or at least so it seemed to the sad babies of the Santa Maria. "It's as plain as a monkey on a hand organ," said the telephone boy to the attendants at his salon in the basement, "that there ain't to be no Christmas for we. No, not for we." Had not Dorothy produced at this junction, from the folds of her fluffy silken skirts, several substantial sticks of gum, there is no saying to what depths of discouragement the flat children would have fallen. At 6 o'clock it seemed as if the children would smother for lack of air. It was very peculiar. Even the janitor noticed it. He spoke about it to Kara at the head of the back stairs, and she held her hand so as to let him see the new silver ring on her fourth finger, and he let go of the rope on the elevator on which he was standing and dropped to the bottom of the shaft, so that Kara sent up a wild halloo of alarm. But the janitor emerged as melancholy and unruffled as ever, only looking at his watch to see if it had been stopped by the concussion. The telephone boy, who usually got a bit of something hot sent down to him from one of the tables, owing to the fact that he never ate any meal save breakfast at home, was quite forgotten on this day, and dined off 2 russet apples, and drew up his belt to stop the ache. For the telephone boy was growing very fast indeed, in spite of his poverty, and he couldn't seem to stop growing somehow, although he said to himself every day that it was perfectly brutal of him to keep on that way, when his mother had so many mouths to feed. Well, well, the tightness of the air got worse. Every one was cross at dinner, and complained of feeling tired afterward, and of wanting to go to bed. For all of that, it was not to get to sleep, and the children tossed and tumbled for a long time before they put their little hands in the big, soft, shadowy clasps of the Sandman, and trooped away after him to the happy town of sleep. It seemed to the flat children that they had been asleep for a few moments, when there came a terrible burst of wind that shook even that great house to its foundations. Actually, as they sat up in bed and called to their parents or their nurses, their voices seemed smothered with roar. Could it be that the wind was a great wild beast with 100 tongues, which licked at the roof of the building? And how many voices must it have to bellow as it did? Sounds of falling glass, of breaking shutters, of crashing chimneys greeted their ears. Not that they knew what all these sounds meant. They only knew that it seemed as if the end of the world had come. Ernest, miserable as he was, wondered if the telephone boy had gotten safely home, or if he were alone in the draughty room in the basement. And Roderick hugged his big brother, who slept with him, and said, "Now I lay me," 3 times running, as fast as ever his tongue would say it. After a terrible time the wind settled down into a steady howl like a hungry wolf, and the children went to sleep, worn out with the fright and conscious that the bedclothes could not keep out the cold. Dawn came. The children awoke shivering. They sat up in bed and looked about them. Yes, they did, the whole 26 of them in their different apartments and their different homes. And what do you suppose they saw? What do you suppose the 26 flat children saw as they looked about them? Why, stockings stuffed full, and trees hung full, and boxes packed full. Yes, they did. It was Christmas morning, and the bells were ringing, and all the little flat children were laughing, for Santa Claus had come. He had really come. In the wind and wild weather, while the tongues of the wind licked hungrily at the roof, while the wind howled like a hungry wolf, He had crept in somehow, and laughing, no doubt, and chuckling without question, he had filled the stockings and the trees and the boxes. Dear me, dear me, but it was a happy time! It makes me out of breath to think what a happy time it was, and how surprised the Flat children were, and how they wondered how it could ever have happened. But they found out, of course. It happened in the simplest way. Every skylight in the place was blown off and away, and that was how the wind howled so, and how the bedclothes would not keep the children warm, and how Santa Claus got in. The wind corkscrewed down into these holes, and the reckless children, with their drums and dolls, their guns and toy dishes, danced around in the maelstrom and sang: "Here's where Santa Claus came. This is how he got in. We should count it a sin, yes, count it a shame, if it hurt when he fell on the floor." Roderick's sister, who was clever for a child of her age, and who had read Monte Cristo 10 times, though she was only 11, wrote this poem, which every one thought very fine. And of course all the parents thought and said that Santa Claus must have jumped down the skylights. By noon there were other skylights put in, and not a sign left of the way he made his entrance. Not that the way mattered a bit. No, not a bit. Perhaps you think the telephone boy didn't get anything. Maybe you imagine that Santa Claus didn't get down that far. But you are mistaken. The shaft below one of the skylights went away to the bottom of the building, and it stands to reason that the old fellow must have fallen way through. At any rate, there was a copy of Tom Sawyer, and a whole plum pudding, and a number of other things, more useful but not so interesting, found down in the chilly basement room. There were indeed. In closing, it is only proper to mention that Kara Johnson crocheted a white silk four-in-hand necktie for Carl Carlson, the janitor, and the janitor smiled. End of How Christmas Came to the Santa Maria Flats by Ilya W. Peedy. Story number 22 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The Legend of Babushka, adapted from the Russian. It was the night the dear Christ child came to Bethlehem. In a country far away from him, an old, old woman named Babushka sat in her snug little house by her warm fire. The wind was drifting the snow outside and howling down the chimney, but it only made Babushka's fire burn more brightly. "How glad I am that I may stay indoors," said Babushka, holding her hands out to the bright blaze. But suddenly she heard a loud rap at her door. She opened it, and her candle shone on 3 old men standing outside in the snow. Their beards were as white as the snow, and so long that they reached the ground. Their eyes shone kindly in the light of Babushka's candle, and their arms were full of precious things, boxes of jewels and sweet-smelling oils and ointments. "We have travelled far, Babushka," they said, "and we stopped to tell you of the baby prince born this night in Bethlehem. He comes to rule the world and teach all men to be loving and true. We carry him gifts. Come with us, Babushka." But Babushka looked at the drifting snow, and then inside at her cozy room and the crackling fire. "It is too late for me to go with you, good sirs," she said. "The weather is too cold." She went inside again and shut the door, and the old men journeyed on to Bethlehem without her. But as Babushka sat by her fire, rocking, she began to think about the little Christ child, for she loved all babies. "To-morrow I will go to find him," she said. "To-morrow when it is light, and I will carry him some toys." So when it was morning, Babushka put on her long cloak, and took her staff, and filled her basket with the pretty things a baby would like, gold balls and wooden toys and strings of silver cobwebs, and she set out to find the Christ child. But oh, Babushka had forgotten to ask the 3 old men the road to Bethlehem, and they travelled so far through the night that she could not overtake them. Up and down the road she hurried, through woods and fields and towns, saying to whomsoever she met, "I go to find the Christ child. Where does he lie? I bring some pretty toys for his sake." But no one could tell her the way to go, and they all said, "Farther on, Babushka, farther on." So she travelled on and on and on, for years and years, but she never found the little Christ child. They say that old Babushka is travelling still, looking for him. When it comes Christmas Eve, and the children are lying fast asleep, Babushka comes softly through the snowy fields and towns, wrapped in her long cloak, and carrying her basket on her arm. With her staff she raps gently at the doors, and goes inside and holds her candle close to the little children's faces. "Is he here?" she asks. "Is the little Christ child here?" And then she turns sorrowfully away again, crying, "Farther on, farther on." But before she leaves she takes a toy from her basket and lays it beside the pillow for a Christmas gift. "For his sake," she says softly, and then hurries on through the years and forever in search of the little Christ child. End of The Legend of Babushka, adapted from the Russian. Story number 23 in the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Christmas in the Barn by F. Arnstein. Only 2 more days and Christmas would be here. It had been snowing hard, and Johnny was standing at the window, looking at the soft white snow which covered the ground half a foot deep. Presently he heard the noise of wheels coming up the road, and a wagon turned in at the gate and came past the window. Johnny was very curious to know what the wagon could be bringing. He pressed his little nose close to the cold window pane, and to his great surprise saw 2 large Christmas trees. Johnny wondered why there were 2 trees, and turned quickly to run and tell mamma all about it, but then remembered that mamma was not at home. She had gone to the city to buy some Christmas presents, and would not return until quite late. Johnny began to feel that his toes and fingers had grown quite cold from standing at the window so long, so he drew his own little chair up to the cheerful grate fire and sat there quietly thinking. Pussy, who had been curled up like a little bundle of wool in the very warmest corner, jumped up, and going to Johnny, rubbed her head against his knee to attract his attention. He patted her gently and began to talk to her about what was in his thoughts. He had been puzzling over the 2 trees which had come, and at last had made up his mind about them. "I know now, Pussy," said he, "why there are 2 trees. This morning when I kissed papa good-bye at the gate, he said he was going to buy one for me, and mamma, who was busy in the house, did not hear him say so, and I am sure she must have bought the other. But what shall we do with 2 Christmas trees?" Pussy jumped into his lap and purred and purred. A plan suddenly flashed into Johnny's mind. "Would you like to have one, Pussy?" Pussy purred more loudly, and it seemed almost as though she had said yes. "Oh, I will, if mamma will let me. I'll have a Christmas tree out in the barn for you, Pussy, and for all the pets, and then you'll all be as happy as I shall be with my tree in the parlour." By this time it had grown quite late. There was a ring at the doorbell, and quick as a flash Johnny ran with happy, smiling face to meet papa and mamma, and gave them each a loving kiss. During the evening he told them all that he had done that day, and also about the 2 big trees which the man had brought. It was just as Johnny had thought. Papa and mamma had each bought one, and as it was so near Christmas, they thought they would not send either of them back. Johnny was very glad of this, and told them of the happy plan he had made, and asked if he might have the extra tree. Papa and mamma smiled a little as Johnny explained his plan, but they said he might have the tree, and Johnny went to bed feeling very happy. That night his papa fastened the tree into a block of wood, so that it would stand firmly, and then set it in the middle of the barn floor. The next day, when Johnny had finished his lessons, he went to the kitchen and asked Annie, the cook, if she would save the bones and potato parings and all other leavings from the day's meals and give them to him the following morning. He also begged her to give him several cupfuls of salt and cornmeal, which she did, putting them in paper bags for him. Then she gave him the dishes he asked for, a few chipped ones not good enough to be used at table, and an old wooden bowl. Annie wanted to know what Johnny intended to do with all these things, but he only said, "Wait until to-morrow, then you shall see." He gathered up all the things which the cook had given him and carried them to the barn, placing them on a shelf in one corner, where he was sure no one would touch them, and where they would be all ready for him to use the next morning. Christmas morning came, and as soon as he could, Johnny hurried out to the barn, where stood the Christmas tree which he was going to trim for all his pets. The first thing he did was to get a paper bag of oats. This he tied to one of the branches of the tree, for Brownie the mare. Then he made up several bundles of hay, and tied these on the other side of the tree, not quite so high up, where Whiteface the cow could reach them, and on the lowest branches some more hay for Spotty the calf. Next Johnny hurried to the kitchen to get the things Annie had promised to save for him. She had plenty to give. With his arms and hands full, he went back to the barn. He found 3 lovely bones, with plenty of meat on them. These he tied together to another branch of the tree, for Rover, his big black dog. Under the tree he placed the big wooden bowl, and filled it well with potato parings, rice, and meat, left from yesterday's dinner. This was the full and tempting trough for Piggywig. Near this he placed a bowl of milk for Pussy, on one plate the salt for the pet lamb, and on another the cornmeal for the dear little chickens. On the top of the tree he tied a basket of nuts. These were for his pet squirrel, and I had almost forgotten to tell you of the bunch of carrots tied very low down, where soft white Bunny could reach them. When all was done, Johnny stood off a little way to look at this wonderful Christmas tree. Clapping his hands with delight, he ran to call Mamma and Papa and Annie, and they laughed aloud when they saw what he had done. It was the funniest Christmas tree they had ever seen. They were sure the pets would like the presents Johnny had chosen. Then there was a busy time in the barn. Papa and Mamma and Annie helped about bringing in the animals, and before long Brownie, Whiteface, Spotty, Rover, Piggywig, Pussy, Lambkin, the chickens, the squirrel, and Bunny, the rabbit, had been led each to his own Christmas breakfast on and under the tree. What a funny sight it was to see them all standing around looking happy and contented, eating and drinking with such an appetite. While watching them, Johnny had another thought, and he ran quickly to the house, and brought out the new trumpet which Papa had given him for Christmas. By this time the animals had all finished their breakfast, and Johnny gave a little toot on his trumpet as a signal that the tree festival was over. Brownie went, neighing and prancing, to her stall. Whiteface walked demurely off with a bellow, which Spotty, the calf, running at her heels, tried to imitate. The little lamb skipped bleating away. Piggywig walked off with a grunt. Pussy jumped on the fence with a mew. The squirrel still sat up in the tree, cracking her nuts. Bunny hopped to her snug little quarters, while Rover, barking loudly, chased the chickens back to their coop. Such a hubbub of noises! Mamma said it sounded as if they were trying to say, "Merry Christmas to you, Johnny. Merry Christmas to all." End of Christmas in the Barn by F. Arnstein. Story number 24 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. "Did you see this committee yesterday, Mr. Matthews?" asked the philanthropist. His secretary looked up. "Yes, sir." "You recommend them, then?" "Yes, sir." "For 50,000?" "For 50,000, yes, sir." "Their corresponding subscriptions are guaranteed?" "I went over the list carefully, Mr. Carter. The money is promised, and by responsible people." "Very well," said the philanthropist. "You may notify them, Mr. Matthews, that my 50,000 will be available as the bills come in." "Yes, sir." Old Mr. Carter laid down the letter he had been reading, and took up another. As he perused it, his white eyebrows rose in irritation. "Mr. Matthews," he snapped. "Yes, sir." "You are careless, sir." "I beg your pardon, Mr. Carter?" questioned the secretary, his face flushing. The old gentleman tapped impatiently the letter he held in his hand. "Do you pay no attention, Mr. Matthews, to my rule that no personal letters containing appeals for aid are to reach me? How do you account for this, may I ask?" "I beg your pardon," said the secretary again. "You will see, Mr. Carter, that this letter is dated 3 weeks ago. I have had the woman's case carefully investigated. She is undoubtedly of good reputation and undoubtedly in need, and as she speaks of her father as having associated with you, I thought perhaps you would care to see her letter." "1,000 worthless fellows associated with me," said the old man harshly. "In a great factory, Mr. Matthews, a boy works alongside of men he is put with. He does not pick and choose. I dare say this woman is telling the truth. What of it? You know that I regard my money as a public trust. Were my energy, my concentration, to be wasted by innumerable individual assaults, what would become of them? My fortune would slip through my fingers as unprofitably as sand. You understand, Mr. Matthews? Let me see no more individual letters. You know that Mr. Whittemore has full authority to deal with them. May I trouble you to ring? I'm going out." A man appeared very promptly in answer to the bell. "Sniffen, my overcoat," said the philanthropist. "It is, sir," answered Sniffen, helping the thin old man into the great fur folds. "There is no word of the dog, I suppose, Sniffen?" "None, sir. The police was here again yesterday, sir, but they said as 'ow." "The police!" The words were fierce with scorn. 8,000 incompetents! He turned abruptly and went toward the door, where he halted a moment. "Mr. Matthews, since that woman's letter did reach me, I suppose I must pay for my carelessness or yours. Send her what does she say 4 children? Send her $100, but for my sake send it anonymously. Write her that I pay no attention to such claims," he went on, and Sniffen closed the door behind him. "Takes loosen the little dog 'ard, don't he?" remarked Sniffen sadly to the secretary. "I'm afraid there ain't a chance of finding him now. He ain't been stole, nor he ain't been found, or they'd 'ave brung him back for the reward. He's been knocked on the 'ead like as not. He wasn't much of a dog to look at, you see, just a pup, I'd call him, and after he learned that trick of slipping his collar off, well, I fancy Mr. Carter's seen the last of him. I do indeed." Mr. Carter, meanwhile, was making his way slowly down the snowy avenue, upon his accustomed walk. The walk, however, was dull today, for Skiddles, his little terrier, was not with him to add interest and excitement. Mr. Carter had found Skiddles in the country a year and a half before. Skiddles, then a puppy, was at the time in a most undignified and undesirable position, stuck in a drain tile and unable either to advance or to retreat. Mr. Carter had shoved him forward after a heroic struggle, whereupon Skiddles had licked his hand. Something in the little dog's eye or his action had induced the rich philanthropist to bargain for him and buy him at a cost of half a dollar. Thereafter Skiddles became his daily companion, his chief distraction, and finally the apple of his eye. Skiddles was of no known parentage, hardly of any known breed, but he suited Mr. Carter. What, the millionaire reflected with a proud cynicism, were his own antecedents, if it came to that. But now Skiddles had disappeared. As Sniffen said, he had learned the trick of slipping free from his collar. One morning the great front doors had been left open for 2 minutes while the hallway was aired. Skiddles must have slipped down the marble steps unseen and dodged round the corner. At all events, he had vanished, and although the whole police force of the city had been roused to secure his return, it was aroused in vain. And for 3 weeks, therefore, a small, straight, white-bearded man in a fur overcoat had walked in mournful irritation alone. He stood upon a corner uncertainly. One way led to the park, and this he usually took. But today he did not want to go to the park. It was too reminiscent of Skiddles. He looked the other way. Down there, if one went far enough, lay slums, and Mr. Carter hated the sight of slums. They always made him miserable and discontented. With all his money and his philanthropy, was there still necessity for such misery in the world? Worse still came the intrusive question at times, had all his money anything to do with the creation of this misery? He owned no tenements. He paid good wages in every factory. He had given some such as few men have given in the history of philanthropy. Still, there were the slums. However, the worst slums lay some distance off, and he finally turned his back on the park and walked on. It was the day before Christmas. You saw it in people's faces. You saw it in the holly wreaths that hung in windows. You saw it even as you passed the splendid, forbidding houses on the avenue, in the green that here and there banked massive doors. But most of all, you saw it in the shops. Up here the shops were smallish and chiefly of the provision variety, so there was no bewildering display of gifts, but there were Christmas trees everywhere of all sizes. It was astonishing how many people in that neighbourhood seemed to favour the old-fashioned idea of a tree. Mr. Carter looked at them with his irritation softening. If they made him feel a trifle more lonely, they allowed him to feel also a trifle less responsible, for after all it was a fairly happy world. At this moment he perceived a curious phenomenon a short distance before him. Another Christmas tree, but one which moved, apparently of its own volition, along the sidewalk. As Mr. Carter overtook it, he saw that it was borne, or dragged, rather by a small boy who wore a bright red flannel cap and mittens of the same peculiar material. As Mr. Carter looked down at him, he looked up at Mr. Carter and spoke cheerfully. "Going my way, mister?" "Why," said the philanthropist, somewhat taken aback, "I was." "Mind dragging this a little way?" asked the boy confidently. "My hands is cold." "Won't you enjoy it more if you manage to take it home by yourself?" "Oh, it ain't for me," said the boy. "Your employer," said the philanthropist severely, "is certainly careless if he allows his trees to be delivered in this fashion." "I ain't delivering it either," said the boy. "This is Bill's tree." "Who's Bill?" "He's a feller with a back that's no good." "Is he your brother?" "No. Take the tree a little way, will you, while I warm myself?" The philanthropist accepted the burden. He did not know why. The boy, released, ran forward, jumped up and down, slapped his red flannel mittens on his legs, and then ran back again. After repeating these manoeuvres 2 or 3 times, he returned to where the old gentleman stood holding the tree. "Thanks," he said. "Say, mister, you look like Santa Claus yourself, standing by the tree, with your fur cap and your coat. I bet you don't have to run to keep warm, hey?" There was high admiration in his look. Suddenly his eyes sparkled with an inspiration. "Say, mister," he cried, "will you do something for me? Come into Bill's. He lives only a block from here, and just let him see you. He's only a kid, and he'll think he's seen Santa Claus, sure. We can tell him you're so busy tomorrow you have to go to lots of places today. You won't have to give him anything. We're looking out for all that. Bill got hurt in the summer, and he's been in bed ever since. So we're giving him a Christmas, tree and all. He gets a bunch of things, an air gun and a train that goes round when you wind her up. They're great." "You boys are doing this?" "Well, it's our club at the settlement, and of course Miss Gray thought of it, and she's given Bill the train. Come along, mister." But Mr. Carter declined. "All right," said the boy. "I guess, what with Pete and all, Bill will have Christmas enough." "Who's Pete?" "Bill's dog. He's had him 3 weeks now. Best little pup you ever saw." A dog which Bill had had 3 weeks, and in a neighbourhood not a quarter of a mile from the avenue. It was 3 weeks since Skiddles had disappeared. That this dog was Skiddles was of course most improbable, and yet the philanthropist was ready to grasp at any clue which might lead to the lost terrier. "How did Bill get this dog?" he demanded. "I found him myself. Some kids had tin-canned him, and he came into our entry. He licked my hand and then sat up on his hind legs. Somebody taught him that, you know. I thought right away, here's a dog for Bill, and I took him over there and fed him, and they kept him in Bill's room 2 or 3 days so he shouldn't get scared again and run off. And now he wouldn't leave Bill for anybody. Of course he ain't much of a dog. Pete ain't," he added. "He's just a pup, but he's mighty friendly." "Boys," said Mr. Carter, "I guess I'll just go round and—" He was about to add, "have a look at that dog," but fearful of raising suspicion, he ended, "and see Bill." The tenements to which the boy led him were of brick and reasonably clean. Nearly every window showed some sign of Christmas. The tree bearer led the way into a dark hall, up one flight, Mr. Carter assisting with the tree, and down another dark hall to a door, on which he knocked. A woman opened it. "Here's the tree," said the boy in a loud whisper. "Is Bill's door shut?" Mr. Carter stepped forward out of the darkness. "I beg your pardon, madam," he said. "I met this young man in the street, and he asked me to come here and see a playmate of his, who is, I understand, an invalid. But if I am intruding—" "Come in," said the woman heartily, throwing the door open. "Bill will be glad to see you, sir." The philanthropist stepped inside. The room was decently furnished and clean. There was a sewing machine in the corner, and in both the windows hung wreaths of holly. Between the windows was a clear space where evidently the tree, when decorated, was to stand. "Are all the things here?" eagerly demanded the tree bearer. "They are all here, Jimmy," answered Mrs. Bailey. "The candy just came." "Say," cried the boy, pulling off his red flannel mittens to blow on his fingers, "won't it be great? But now Bill's got to see Santa Claus. I'll just go in and tell him, and then when I holler, mister, you come on and pretend you're Santa Claus." And with incredible celerity the boy opened the door at the opposite end of the room and disappeared. "Madam," said Mr. Carter, in considerable embarrassment, "I must say one word. I am Mr. Carter, Mr. Allen Carter. You may have heard of my name?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "I live not far from here on the avenue. 3 weeks ago I lost a little dog that I valued very much. I have had all the city searched since then, in vain. Today I met the boy who has just left us. He informed me that 3 weeks ago he found a dog which is at present in the possession of your son. I wonder, is it not just possible that this dog may be mine?" Mrs. Bailey smiled. "I guess not, Mr. Carter. The dog Jimmy found hadn't come off the avenue, not from the look of him. You know there's hundreds and hundreds of dogs without homes, sir, but I will say for this one, he has a kind of way with him." "Hark!" said Mr. Carter. There was a rustling and a snuffing at the door at the far end of the room, a quick scratching of feet. Then woof, woof, woof! Sharp and clear came happy, impatient little barks. The philanthropist's eyes brightened. "Yes," he said, "that is the dog." "I doubt if it can be, sir," said Mrs. Bailey deprecatingly. "Open the door, please," commanded the philanthropist, "and let us see." Mrs. Bailey complied. There was a quick jump, a tumbling rush, and Skiddles, the lost Skiddles, was in the philanthropist's arms. Mrs. Bailey shut the door with a troubled face. "I see it's your dog, sir," she said, "but I hope you won't be thinking that Jimmy or I—" "Madam," interrupted Mr. Carter, "I would not be so foolish. On the contrary, I owe you 1,000 thanks." Mrs. Bailey looked more cheerful. "Poor little Billy," she said. "It'll come hard on him, losing Pete just at Christmas time. But the boys are so good to him I dare say he'll forget it." "Who are these boys?" inquired the philanthropist. "Isn't their action somewhat unusual?" "It's Miss Gray's club at the settlement, sir," explained Mrs. Bailey. "Every Christmas they do this for somebody. It's not charity. Billy and I don't need charity, or take it. It's just friendliness. They're good boys." "I see," said the philanthropist. He was still wondering about it, though, when the door opened again and Jimmy thrust out a face shining with anticipation. "All ready, mister," he said. "Bill's waiting for you." "Jimmy," began Mrs. Bailey, about to explain. The gentleman, but the philanthropist held up his hand, interrupting her. "You'll let me see your son, Mrs. Bailey?" he asked gently. "Yes, certainly, sir." Mr. Carter put Skiddles down and walked slowly into the inner room. The bed stood with its side toward him. On it lay a small boy of 7, rigid of body, but with his arms free and his face lighted with joy. "Hello, Santa Claus," he piped, in a voice shrill with excitement. "Hello, Bill," answered the philanthropist sedately. The boy turned his eyes on Jimmy. "He knows my name," he said with glee. "He knows everybody's name," said Jimmy. "Now you tell him what you want, Bill, and he'll bring it tomorrow." "How would you like," said the philanthropist reflectively, "an" he hesitated. It seemed so incongruous with that stiff figure on the bed, "an air gun?" "I guess yes," said Bill happily. "And a train of cars," broke in the impatient Jimmy, "that goes like 60 when you wind her." "Hi!" said Bill. The philanthropist solemnly made notes of this. "How about," he remarked inquiringly, "a tree?" "Honest?" said Bill. "I think it can be managed," said Santa Claus. He advanced to the bedside. "I'm glad to have seen you, Bill. You know how busy I am, but I hope to see you again." "Not till next year, of course," warned Jimmy. "Not till then, of course," assented Santa Claus. "And now, good bye." "You forgot to ask him if he'd been a good boy," suggested Jimmy. "I have," said Bill. "I've been fine. You ask Mother. She gives you both a high character," said Santa Claus. "Good bye again." And so saying, he withdrew. Skiddles followed him out. The philanthropist closed the door of the bedroom, and then turned to Mrs. Bailey. She was regarding him with awestruck eyes. "Oh, sir," she said, "I know now who you are, the Mr. Carter that gives so much away to people." The philanthropist nodded deprecatingly. "Just so, Mrs. Bailey," he said. "And there is one gift, or loan rather, which I should like to make to you. I should like to leave the little dog with you till after the holidays. I'm afraid I'll have to claim him then, but if you'll keep him till after Christmas, and let me find perhaps another dog for Billy, I shall be much obliged." Again the door of the bedroom opened, and Jimmy emerged quietly. "Bill wants the pup," he explained. "Pete, Pete," came the piping but happy voice from the inner room. Skiddles hesitated. Mr. Carter made no sign. "Pete, Pete," shrilled the voice again. Slowly, very slowly, Skiddles turned and went back into the bedroom. "You see," said Mr. Carter, smiling, "he won't be too unhappy away from me, Mrs. Bailey." On his way home the philanthropist saw even more evidence of Christmas gaiety along the streets than before. He stepped out briskly. In spite of his 68 years, he even hummed a little tune. When he reached the house on the avenue, he found his secretary still at work. "Oh, by the way, Mr. Matthews," he said, "did you send that letter to the woman saying I never paid attention to personal appeals?" "No." "Then write her, please, enclosing my check for $200, and wish her a very Merry Christmas in my name, will you? And hereafter will you always let me see such letters as that one? Of course, after careful investigation. I fancy perhaps I may have been too rigid in the past." "Certainly, sir," answered the bewildered secretary. He began fumbling excitedly for his notebook. "I found the little dog," continued the philanthropist. "You will be glad to know that." "You have found him?" cried the secretary. "Have you got him back, Mr. Carter? Where was he?" "He was detained on Oak Street, I believe," said the philanthropist. "No, I have not got him back yet. I have left him with a young boy till after the holidays." He settled himself to his papers, for philanthropists must toil even on the 24th of December. But the secretary shook his head in a daze. "I wonder what's happened," he said to himself. End of The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. Story number 25 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The First Christmas Tree by Lucy Wheelock. Two little children were sitting by the fire one cold winter's night. All at once they heard a timid knock at the door, and one ran to open it. There, outside in the cold and darkness, stood a child with no shoes upon his feet and clad in thin, ragged garments. He was shivering with cold, and he asked to come in and warm himself. "Yes, come in," cried both the children. "You shall have our place by the fire. Come in." They drew the little stranger to their warm seat and shared their supper with him and gave him their bed, while they slept on a hard bench. In the night they were awakened by strains of sweet music, and looking out they saw a band of children in shining garments approaching the house. They were playing on golden harps, and the air was full of melody. Suddenly the strange child stood before them, no longer cold and ragged, but clad in silvery light. His soft voice said, "I was cold, and you took me in. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was tired, and you gave me your bed. I am the Christ child, wandering through the world to bring peace and happiness to all good children. As you have given to me, so may this tree every year give rich fruit to you." So saying, he broke a branch from the fir tree that grew near the door, and he planted it in the ground and disappeared. And the branch grew into a great tree, and every year it bore wonderful fruit for the kind children. End of The First Christmas Tree. by Lucy Wheelock. Story number 26 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, June 2012. The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The First New England Christmas by G.L. Stone and M.G. Fickett. It was a warm and pleasant Saturday, that 23rd of December, 1620. The winter wind had blown itself away in the storm of the day before, and the air was clear and balmy. The people on board the Mayflower were glad of the pleasant day. It was 3 long months since they had started from Plymouth, in England, to seek a home across the ocean. Now they had come into a harbour that they had named New Plymouth, in the country of New England. Other people called these voyagers Pilgrims, which means wanderers. A long while before, the Pilgrims had lived in England. Later they made their home with the Dutch in Holland. Finally they had said good-bye to their friends in Holland and in England, and had sailed away to America. There were only 102 of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower, but they were brave and strong and full of hope. Now the Mayflower was the only home they had, yet if this weather lasted they might soon have warm log cabins to live in. This very afternoon the men had gone ashore to cut down the large trees. The women on the Mayflower were busy too. Some were spinning, some knitting, some sewing. It was so bright and pleasant that Mistress Rose Standish had taken out her knitting and had gone to sit a little while on deck. She was too weak to face rough weather, and she wanted to enjoy the warm sunshine and the clear salt air. By her side was Mistress Brewster, the minister's wife. Everybody loved Mistress Standish and Mistress Brewster, for neither of them ever spoke unkindly. The air on deck would have been warm even on a colder day, for in one corner a bright fire was burning. It would seem strange now, would it not, to see a fire on the deck of a vessel? But in those days, when the weather was pleasant, people on shipboard did their cooking on deck. The Pilgrims had no stoves, and Mistress Carver's maid had built this fire on a large hearth covered with sand. She had hung a great kettle on the crane over the fire, where the onion soup for supper was now simmering slowly. Near the fire sat a little girl, busily playing and singing to herself. Little Remember Allerton was only 6 years old, but she liked to be with Hannah, Mistress Carver's maid. This afternoon Remember had been watching Hannah build the fire and make the soup. Now the little girl was playing with the Indian arrowheads her father had brought her the night before. She was singing the words of the old psalm: "Shout to Jehovah, all the earth. Serve ye Jehovah with gladness. Before him bow with singing mirth." "Ah, child, methinks the children of old England are singing different words from those today," spoke Hannah at length, with a far-away look in her eyes. "Why, Hannah, what songs are the little English children singing now?" questioned Remember in surprise. "It lacks but 2 days of Christmas, child, and in my old home everybody is singing Merry Christmas songs." "But thou hast not told me what is Christmas," persisted the child. "Ah me, thou dost not know, 'tis true. Christmas, Remember, is the birthday of the Christ child, of Jesus, whom thou hast learned to love," Hannah answered softly. "But what makes the English children so happy then? And we are English, thou hast told me, Hannah. Why don't we keep Christmas too?" "It's sooth we are English, child, but the reason why we do not sing the Christmas carols or play the Christmas games makes a long, long story, Remember. Hannah cannot tell it so that little children will understand. Thou must ask some other child." Hannah and the little girl were just then near the 2 women on the deck, and Remember said: "Mistress Brewster, Hannah saith she knoweth not how to tell why Love and Wrestling and Constance and the others do not sing the Christmas songs or play the Christmas games. But thou wilt tell me, wilt thou not?" she added coaxingly. A sad look came into Mistress Brewster's eyes, and Mistress Standish looked grave too. No one spoke for a few seconds, until Hannah said almost sharply: "Why could we not burn a Yule log Monday and make some meal into little cakes for the children?" "Nay, Hannah," answered the gentle voice of Mistress Brewster. Such are but vain shows, and not for those of us who believe in holier things. But," she added, with a kind glance at little Remember, "wouldst thou like to know why we have left old England, and do not keep the Christmas day? Thou canst not understand it all, child, and yet it may do thee no harm to hear the story. It may help thee to be a brave and happy little girl in the midst of our hard life." "Surely it can do no harm, Mistress Brewster," spoke Rose Standish gently. "Remember is a little pilgrim now, and she ought, methinks, to know something of the reason for our wandering. Come here, child, and sit by me, while good Mistress Brewster tells thee how cruel men have made us suffer. Then will I sing thee one of the Christmas carols." With these words she held out her hands to little Remember, who ran quickly to the side of Mistress Standish and eagerly waited for the story to begin. "We have not always lived in Holland, Remember. Most of us were born in England, and England is the best country in the world. 'Tis a land to be proud of, Remember, though some of its rulers have been wicked and cruel. Long before you were born, when your mother was a little girl, the English king said that everybody in the land ought to think as he thought, and go to a church like his. He said he would send us away from England if we did not do as he ordered. Now, we could not think as he did on holy matters, and it seemed wrong to us to obey him. So we decided to go to a country where we might worship as we pleased. What became of that cruel king, Mistress Brewster? He ruleth England now, but thou must not think too hardly of him. He doth not understand, perhaps. Right will win some day, Remember, though there may be bloody war before peace cometh. And I thank God that we, at least, shall not be called on to live in the midst of the strife," she went on, speaking more to herself than to the little girl. "We decided to go to Holland, out of the reach of the king. We were not sure whether it was best to move or not, but our hearts were set on God's ways. We trusted Him in whom we believed. Yes," she went on, "and shall we not keep on trusting Him?" And Rose Standish, remembering the little stock of food that was nearly gone, the disease that had come upon many of their number, and the 5 who had died that month, answered firmly, "Yes, He who has led us thus far will not leave us now." They were all silent a few seconds. Presently Remember said, "Then did we go to Holland, Mistress Brewster?" "Yes," she said, "our people all went over to Holland, where the Dutch folk live and the little Dutch children clatter about with their wooden shoes. There thou wast born, Remember, and my own children, and there we lived in love and peace. And yet we were not wholly happy. We could not talk well with the Dutch, and so we could not set right what was wrong among them. 'Twas so hard to earn money that many had to go back to England. And worst of all, Remember, we were afraid that you and little Bartholomew and Mary and Love and Wrestling and all the rest would not grow to be good girls and boys. And so we have come to this new country to teach our children to be pure and noble." After another silence, Remember spoke again. "I thank thee, Mistress Brewster, and I will try to be a good girl. But thou didst not tell me about Christmas after all." "Nay, child, but now I will. There are long services on that day in every church where the King's friends go. But there are parts of these services which we cannot approve, and so we think it best not to follow the other customs that the King's friends observe on Christmas. They trim their houses with mistletoe and holly, so that everything looks gay and cheerful. Their other name for the Christmas time is the Yuletide, and the big log that is burned then is called the Yule log. The children like to sit around the hearth in front of the great blazing Yule log and listen to stories of long, long ago. At Christmas there are great feasts in England, too. No one is allowed to go hungry, for the rich people on the days always send meat and cakes to the poor folk round about. But we like to make all our days Christmas days, Remember. We try never to forget God's gifts to us, and they remind us always to be good to other people." "And the Christmas carols, Mistress Standish, what are they?" "On Christmas Eve and early on Christmas morning," Rose Standish answered, "little children go about from house to house singing Christmas songs. 'Tis what I like best in all of the Christmas cheer. And I promised to sing thee one, did I not?" Then Mistress Standish sang in her dear, sweet voice the quaint old English words: "As Joseph was a walking, he heard an angel sing, 'This night shall be the birth time of Christ the heavenly King. He neither shall be born in housen nor in hall, nor in the place of paradise, but in an ox's stall. He neither shall be clothed in purple nor in pall, but in the fair white linen that usen babies all. He neither shall be rocked in silver nor in gold, but in a wooden manger that resteth in the mould. As Joseph was a walking, there did an angel sing, and Mary's child at midnight was born to be our King. Then be ye glad, good people, this night of all the year, and light ye up your candles, for his star it shineth clear. Before the song was over, Hannah had come on deck again, and was listening eagerly. "I thank thee, Mistress Standish," she said, the tears filling her blue eyes. "'Tis long indeed since I have heard that song." "Would it be wrong for me to learn to sing those words, Mistress Standish?" gently questioned the little girl. "Nay, remember, I trow not. The song shall be thy Christmas gift." Then Mistress Standish taught the little girl one verse after another of the sweet old carol, and it was not long before Remember could say it all. The next day was dull and cold, and on Monday, the 25th, the sky was still overcast. There was no bright Yule log in the Mayflower, and no holly trimmed the little cabin. The Pilgrims were true to the faith they loved. They held no special service, they made no gifts. Instead, they went again to the work of cutting the trees, and no one murmured at this hard lot. "We went on shore," one man wrote in his diary, "some to fell timber, some to saw, some to rive, and some to carry, so no man rested all that day." As for little Remember, she spent the day on board the Mayflower. She heard no one speak of England or sigh for the English home across the sea, but she did not forget Mistress Brewster's story. And more than once that day, as she was playing by herself, she fancied that she was in front of some English home, helping the English children sing their Christmas songs, and both Mistress Allerton and Mistress Standish, whom God was soon to call away from their earthly home, felt happier and stronger as they heard the little girl singing, "He neither shall be born in housen nor in hall, nor in the place of paradise, but in an ox's stall." End of The First New England Christmas by G.L. Stone and M.G. Fickett. Story number 27 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The Cratchits' Christmas Dinner, adapted from Charles Dickens. Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings and from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumping down into the road below and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been ploughed by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons. Furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times where the great streets branched off, and made intricate channels, hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet was there an air of cheerfulness abroad that the dearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shovelling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterer's shop were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors, and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples, clustering high in glooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes, made in the shopkeeper's benevolence, to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, oh, the grocers, nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down, or 1, but through those gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint, and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress, but the customers were all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humour possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection and for Christmas daws to peck at, if they chose. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revellers appeared to interest the Spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humour was restored directly, for they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased, and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners, and the progress of their cooking, in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. "Is there a peculiar flavour in what you sprinkle from your torch?" asked Scrooge. "There is. My own." "Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?" asked Scrooge. "To any kindly given. To a poor one most." "Why to a poor one most?" asked Scrooge. "Because it needs it most." They went on, invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that, notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men, that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks, for there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that! Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed it on Saturdays, but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas Present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out, but poorly, in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which were cheap, and made a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son an heir in honour of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose, and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collar nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "What has ever got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour." "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother," cried the 2 young Cratchits. "Hooray! There's such a goose, Martha!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are!" said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times, and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal. "We'd a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and had to clear away this morning, mother." "Well, never mind so long as you are come," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless ye." "No, no, there's father coming," cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, Martha, hide!" So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed, to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim! He bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking round. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming!" said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from the church, and had come home rampant. "Not coming upon Christmas Day!" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door, and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim, and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. "As good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round, and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a matter of course. And in truth it was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and feebly cried, "Hooray!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness, were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onions to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough? Suppose it should break in turning out? Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose? A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hallo! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannon-ball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that, now the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody thought or said it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up, the compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Tipples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. End of The Cratchits' Christmas Dinner. Adapted from Charles Dickens. Story number 28 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Christmas in 1776 by Anne Hollingsworth Wharton. On Christmas Day in '76, our gallant troops with bayonets fixed to Trenton marched away. Children, Have any of you ever thought of what little people like you were doing in this country more than 100 years ago, when the cruel tide of war swept over its bosom? From many homes the fathers were absent, fighting bravely for the liberty which we now enjoy, while the mothers no less valiantly struggled against hardships and discomforts in order to keep a home for their children, whom you only know as your great grandfathers and great grandmothers, dignified gentlemen and beautiful ladies, whose painted portraits hang upon the walls in some of your homes. Merry, romping children they were in those far off times, yet their bright faces must have looked grave sometimes when they heard the grown people talk of the great things that were happening around them. Some of these little people never forgot the wonderful events of which they heard, and afterward related them to their children and grandchildren, which accounts for some of the interesting stories which you may still hear, if you are good children. The Christmas story that I have to tell you is about a boy and a girl who lived in Bordentown, New Jersey. The father of these children was a soldier in General Washington's army, which was encamped a few miles north of Trenton, on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. Bordentown, as you can see by looking on your map, if you have not hidden them all away for the holidays, is about 7 miles south of Trenton, where 1,500 Hessians and a troop of British light horse were holding the town. Thus you see that the British, in force, were between Washington's army and Bordentown, besides which there were some British and Hessian troops in the very town. All this seriously interfered with Captain Tracy's going home to eat his Christmas dinner with his wife and children. Kitty and Harry Tracy, who had not lived long enough to see many wars, could not imagine such a thing as Christmas without their father, and had busied themselves for weeks in making everything ready to have a merry time with him. Kitty, who loved to play quite as much as any frolicsome Kitty of today, had spent all her spare time in knitting a pair of thick woolen stockings, which seems a wonderful feat for a little girl only 8 years old to perform. Can you not see her sitting by the great chimney place, filled with its roaring, crackling logs, in her quaint, short-waisted dress, knitting away steadily, and puckering up her rosy, dimpled face over the strange twists and turns of that old stocking? I can see her, and I can also hear her sweet voice as she chatters away to her mother about how surprised papa will be to find that his little girl can knit like a grown-up woman, while Harry spreads out on the hearth a goodly store of shell barks that he has gathered and is keeping for his share of the surprise. "What if he shouldn't come?" asked Harry suddenly. "Oh, he'll come. Papa never stays away on Christmas," said Kitty, looking up into her mother's face for an echo to her words. Instead, she sees something very like tears in her mother's eyes. "Oh, mamma, don't you think he'll come?" "He will come if he possibly can," said Mrs. Tracy, "and if he cannot, we will keep Christmas whenever dear papa does come home." "It won't be half so nice," said Kitty. "Nothing so nice as really Christmas, and how's Kriss Kringle going to know about it if we change the day?" "We'll let him come just the same, and if he brings anything for papa, we can put it away for him." This plan still seemed a poor one to Miss Kitty, who went to her bed in a sober mood that night, and was heard telling her dear dolly, Martha Washington, that wars were miserable, and that when she married she should have a man who kept a candy shop for a husband, and not a soldier. "No, Martha, not even if he's as nice as papa." As Martha made no objection to this little arrangement, being an obedient child, they were both soon fast asleep. The days of that cold winter of 1776 wore on. So cold it was that the suffering of the soldiers were great, their bleeding feet often leaving marks on the pure white snow over which they marched. As Christmas drew near, there was a feeling among the patriots that some blow was about to be struck, but what it was and from whence they knew not. And better than all, the British had no idea that any strong blow could come from Washington's army, weak and out of heart, as they thought, after being chased through Jersey for Cornwallis. Mrs. Tracy looked anxiously each day for news of the husband and father only a few miles away, yet so separated by the river and the enemy's troops that they seemed like 100. Christmas Eve came, but brought with it few rejoicings. The hearts of the people were too sad to be taken up with merrymaking, although the Hessian soldiers in the town, good natured Germans who only fought the Americans because they were paid for it, gave themselves up to the feasting and revelry. "Shall we hang up our stockings?" asked Kitty, in rather a doleful voice. "Yes," said her mother. "Santa Claus won't forget you, I'm sure, although he has been kept pretty busy looking after the soldiers this winter." "Which side is he on?" asked Harry. "The right side, of course," said Mrs. Tracy, which was the most sensible answer she could possibly have given. So the stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that Saint Nicholas soon would be there. Two little rosy faces lay fast asleep upon the pillow when the good old soul came dashing over the roof about 1 o'clock, and after filling each stocking with red apples and leaving a cornucopia of sugar plums for each child, he turned for a moment to look at the sleeping faces, for Saint Nicholas has a tender spot in his great big heart for a soldier's children. Then, remembering many other small folks waiting for him all over the land, he sprang up the chimney and was away in a trice. Santa Claus, in the form of Mrs. Tracy's farmer brother, brought her a splendid turkey. But because the Hessians were uncommonly fond of turkey, it came hidden under a load of wood. Harry was very fond of turkey, too, as well as of all other good things. But when his mother said, "It's such a fine bird, it seems too bad to eat it without Father," Harry cried out, "Yes, keep it for Papa." And Kitty joining in the chorus, the vote was unanimous, and the turkey was hung away to await the return of the good soldier, although it seemed strange, as Kitty told Martha Washington, to have no papa and no turkey on Christmas Day. The day passed and night came, cold with a steady fall of rain and sleet. Kitty prayed that her dear papa might not be out in the storm, and that he might come home and wear his beautiful blue stockings. "And eat his turkey," said Harry's sleepy voice, after which they were soon in the land of dreams. Toward morning the good people in Bordentown were suddenly aroused by firing in the distance, which became more and more distinct as the day wore on. There was great excitement in the town. Men and women gathered together in little groups in the streets to wonder what it was all about, and neighbours came dropping into Mrs. Tracy's parlour all day long, one after the other, to say what they thought of the firing. In the evening there came a body of Hessians flying into the town to say that General Washington had surprised the British at Trenton early that morning and completely routed them, which so frightened the Hessians in Bordentown that they left without the slightest ceremony. It was a joyful hour to the good town people when the red jackets turned their backs on them, thinking every moment that the patriot army would be after them. Indeed, it seemed as if wonders would never cease that day, for while rejoicings were still loud over the departure of the enemy, there came a knock at Mrs. Tracy's door, and while she was wondering whether she dared open it, it was pushed ajar, and a tall soldier entered. What a scream of delight greeted that soldier, and how Kitty and Harry danced about him and clung to his knees, while Mrs. Tracy drew him toward the warm blaze and helped him off with his damp cloak. Cold and tired Captain Tracy was, after a night's march in the streets and a day's fighting, but he was not too weary to smile at the dear faces around him, or to pat Kitty's head when she brought his warm stockings and would put them on the tired feet herself. Suddenly there was a sharp, quick bark outside the door. "What's that?" cried Harry. "Oh, I forgot. Open the door. Here, Fido, Fido." Into the room there sprang a beautiful little King Charles spaniel, white with tan spots and ears of the longest, softest, and silkiest. "What a little dear!" exclaimed Kitty. "Where did it come from?" "From the Battle of Trenton," said her father. "His poor master was shot. After the redcoats had turned their backs and I was hurrying along one of the streets where the fight had been the fiercest, I heard a low groan, and turning saw a British soldier lying among a number of slain. I raised his head. He begged for some water, which I brought him, and bending down my ear I heard him whisper, 'Dying, last battle, say a prayer.' He tried to follow me in the words of a prayer, and then taking my hand laid it on something soft and warm, nestling close up his breast. It was this little dog. The gentleman, for he was a real gentleman, gasped out, Take care of my poor Fido. Good night," and was gone. It was as much as I could do to get the little creature away from his dead master. He clung to him as if he loved him better than life. "You'll take care of him, won't you, children? I brought him home for you, for a Christmas present." "Pretty little Fido," said Kitty, taking the soft, curly creature in her arms. "I think it's the best present in the world, and tomorrow is to be real Christmas, because you are home, papa." "And we'll eat the turkey," said Harry, "and shell barks, lots of them, that I saved for you. What a good time we'll have! And oh, papa, don't go to war any more, but stay at home with mother and Kitty and Fido and me. What would become of our country if we should all do that, my little man?" It was a good day's work that we did this Christmas, getting the army all across the river so quickly and quietly that we surprised the enemy and gained a victory with the loss of few men. Thus it was that some of the good people of 1776 spent their Christmas, that their children and grandchildren might spend many of them as citizens of a free nation. End of The Christmas in 1776 by Anne Hollingsworth Wharton. Story number 29 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Christmas Under the Snow by Olive Thorne Miller. It was just before Christmas, and Mr. Barnes was starting for the nearest village. The family were out at the door to see him start and give him the last charges. "Don't forget the Christmas dinner, papa," said Willie. "'Specially the chickens for the pie," put in Nora. "And the waisins," piped up little Tot, standing tiptoe to give papa a good-bye kiss. "I hate to have you go, George," said Mrs. Barnes anxiously. "It looks to me like a storm." "Oh, I guess it won't be much," said Mr. Barnes lightly. "And the youngsters must have their Christmas dinner, you know." "Well," said Mrs. Barnes, "remember this, George. If there's a bad storm, don't try to come back. Stay in the village till it is over. We can get along alone for a few days, can't we, Willie?" turning to the boy who was giving the last touches to the harness of old Tim, the horse. "Oh, yes, papa, I can take care of mamma," said Willie earnestly. "And get up the Christmas dinner out of nothing?" asked papa, smiling. "I don't know," said Willie, hesitating as he remembered the proposed dinner, in which he felt a deep interest. "What could you do for the chicken pie?" went on papa, with a roguish look in his eye. "Or the plum pudding?" "Or the waisins," broke in Tot anxiously. "Tot has set her heart on the raisins," said papa, tossing the small maiden up higher than his head and dropping her all laughing on the doorstep. "And Tot shall have them sure, if papa can find them in S. Now good bye all. Willie, remember to take care of mamma, and I depend on you to get up a Christmas dinner if I don't get back. Now, wife, don't worry," were his last words, as the faithful old horse started down the road. Mrs. Barnes turned one more glance to the west, where a low, heavy bank of clouds was slowly rising, and went into the little house to attend to her morning duties. "Willie," she said, when they were all in the snug little log cabin in which they lived, "I'm sure there's going to be a storm, and it may be snow. You had better prepare enough wood for 2 or 3 days. Nora will help bring it in." "Me too," said grave little Tot. "Yes, Tot may help too," said mamma. This simple little home was a busy place, and soon every one was hard at work. It was late in the afternoon before the pile of wood, which had been steadily growing all day, was high enough to satisfy Willie, for now there was no doubt about the coming storm, and it would probably bring snow. No one could guess how much, in that country of heavy storms. "I wish the village was not so far off, so that papa could get back tonight," said Willie, as he came in with his last load. Mrs. Barnes glanced out the window. Broad, scattering snowflakes were silently falling. The advance guard she felt them to be of a numerous host. "So do I," she replied anxiously, "or that he did not have to come over that dreadful prairie, where it is so easy to get lost." "But old Tim knows the way, even in the dark," said Willie proudly. "I believe Tim knows more'n some folks." "No doubt he does about the way home," said mamma, "and we won't worry about papa, but have our supper and go to bed. That'll make the time seem short." The meal was soon eaten and cleared away, the fire carefully covered up on the hearth, and the whole little family quietly in bed. Then the storm, which had been making ready all day, came down upon them in earnest. The bleak wind howled around the corners. The white flakes, by millions and millions, came with it, and hurled themselves upon that house. In fact, that poor little cabin alone on the wide prairie seemed to be the object of their sport. They sifted through the cracks in the walls, around the windows and under the door, and made pretty little drifts on the floor. They piled up against it outside, covered the steps, and then the door, and then the windows, and then the roof, and at last buried it completely out of sight under the soft white mass. And all the time the mother and her 3 children lay snugly covered up in their beds, fast asleep, and knew nothing about it. The night passed away and morning came, but no light broke through the windows of the cabin. Mrs. Barnes woke at the usual time, but finding it still dark and perfectly quiet outside, she concluded that the storm was over, and with a sigh of relief turned over to sleep again. About 8 o'clock, however, she could sleep no more, and became wide awake enough to think the darkness strange. At that moment the clock struck, and the truth flashed over her. Being buried under snow is no uncommon thing on the wide prairies, and since they had wood and cornmeal in plenty, she would not have been much alarmed if her husband had been home. But snow deep enough to bury them must cover up all landmarks, and she knew her husband would not rest till he had found them. To get lost on the trackless prairie was fearfully easy, and to suffer and die almost in sight of home was no unusual thing, and was her one dread in living there. A few moments she lay quiet in bed, to calm herself and get control of her own anxieties before she spoke to the children. "Willie," she said at last, "are you awake?" "Yes, mamma," said Willie. "I've been awake ever so long. Isn't it most morning?" "Willie," said the mother quietly, "we mustn't be frightened, but I'm afraid we're snowed in." Willie bounded to his feet and ran to the door. "Don't open it," said mamma hastily. "The snow may fall in. Light a candle and look out the window." In a moment the flickering rays of the candle fell upon the window. Willie drew back the curtain. Snow was tightly banked up against it to the top. "Why, mamma," he exclaimed, "so we are! And how can papa find us? And what shall we do?" "We must do the best we can," said mamma, in a voice which she tried to make steady, "and trust that it isn't very deep, and that Tim and papa will find us and dig us out." By this time the little girls were awake and inclined to be very much frightened, but mamma was calm now, and Willie was brave and hopeful. They all dressed, and Willie started the fire. The smoke refused to rise, but puffed out into the room, and Mrs. Barnes knew that if the chimney were closed they would probably suffocate if they did not starve or freeze. The smoke in a few minutes choked them, and seeing that something must be done, she put the 2 girls, well wrapped in blankets, into the shed outside the back door, closed the door to keep out the smoke, and then went with Willie to the low attic, where a scuttle door opened on to the roof. "We must try," she said, "to get it open without letting in too much snow, and see if we can manage to clear the chimney." "I can reach the chimney from the scuttle with a shovel," said Willie. "I often have with a stick." After much labor and several small avalanches of snow, the scuttle was opened far enough for Willie to stand on the top round of the short ladder and beat a hole through to the light, which was only a foot above. He then shovelled off the top of the chimney, which was ornamented with a big round cushion of snow, and then, by beating and shovelling, he was able to clear the door, which he opened wide, and Mrs. Barnes came up on the ladder to look out. Dreary indeed was the scene. Nothing but snow as far as the eye could reach, and flakes still falling, though lightly. The storm was evidently almost over, but the sky was gray and overcast. They closed the door, went down, and soon had a fire, hoping that the smoke would guide somebody to them. Breakfast was taken by candlelight, dinner in time in the same way, and supper passed with no sound from the outside world. Many times Willie and mamma went to the scuttle door to see if anyone was in sight, but not a shadow broke the broad expanse of white over which toward night the sun shone. Of course there were no signs of the roads, for through so deep snow none could be broken, and until the sun and frost should form a crust on top, there was little hope of their being reached. The second morning broke, and Willie hurried up to his post of lookout the first thing. No person was in sight, but he found a light crust on the snow, and the first thing he noticed was a few half-starved birds trying in vain to pick up something to eat. They looked weak and almost exhausted, and a thought struck Willie. It was hard to keep up the courage of the little household. Nora had openly lamented that tonight was Christmas Eve, and no Christmas dinner to be had. Tot had grown very tearful about her "waisins," and Mrs. Barnes, though she tried to keep up heart, had become very pale and silent. Willie, though he felt unbounded faith in papa and especially in Tim, found it hard to suppress his own complaints when he remembered that Christmas would probably be passed in the same dismal way, with fears for papa added to their own misery. The wood, too, was getting low, and mamma dared not let the fire go out, as that was the only sign of their existence to anybody, and though she did not speak of it, Willie knew, too, that they had not many candles, and in 2 days at furthest they would be left in the dark. The thought that struck Willie pleased him greatly, and he was sure it would cheer up the rest. He made his plans, and went to work to carry them out, without saying anything about it. He brought out of the corner of the attic an old box trap he had used in the summer to catch birds and small animals, set it carefully on the snow, and scattered crumbs of cornbread to attract the birds. In half an hour he went up again, and found to his delight he had caught bigger game, a poor rabbit which had come from no one knows where over the crust to find food. This gave Willie a new idea. They could save their Christmas dinner after all. Rabbits made very nice pies. Poor Bunny was quietly laid to rest, and the trap set again. This time another rabbit was caught, perhaps the mate of the first. This was the last of the rabbits, but the next catch was a couple of snowbirds. These Willie carefully placed in a corner of the attic, using the trap for a cage, and giving them plenty of food and water. When the girls were fast asleep, with tears on their cheeks for the dreadful Christmas they were going to have, Willie told mamma about his plans. Mamma was pale and weak with anxiety, and his news first made her laugh and then cry. But after a few moments given to her long pent-up tears, she felt much better, and entered into his plans heartily. The 2 captives up in the attic were to be Christmas presents to the girls, and the rabbits were to make the long-anticipated pie. As for plum pudding, of course that couldn't be thought of. "But don't you think, mamma," said Willie eagerly, "that you could make some sort of a cake out of meal? And wouldn't hickory nuts be good in it? You know, I have some left up in the attic, and I might crack them softly up there, and don't you think they would be good?" he concluded anxiously. "Well, perhaps so," said mamma, anxious to please him and help him in his generous plans. "I can try, if I only had some eggs. But seems to me I have heard that snow beaten into cake would make it light, and there's snow enough, I'm sure," she added with a faint smile, the first Willie had seen for 3 days. The smile alone he felt to be a great achievement, and he crept carefully up the ladder, cracked the nuts to the last one, brought them down, and mamma picked the meats out, while he dressed the 2 rabbits which had come so opportunely to be their Christmas dinner. "Wish you Merry Christmas," he called out to Nora and Tot when they waked. "See what Santa Claus has brought you." Before they had time to remember what a sorry Christmas it was to be, they received their presents, a live bird for each, a bird that was never to be kept in a cage, but fly about the house till summer came, and then to go away if it wished. Pets were scarce on the prairie, and the girls were delighted. Nothing papa could have brought them would have given them so much happiness. They thought no more of the dinner, but hurried to dress themselves and feed the birds, which were quite tame from hunger and weariness. But after a while they saw preparations for dinner too. Mamma made a crust and lined a deep dish, the chicken pie dish, and then she brought a mysterious something out of the cupboard, all cut up so that it looked as if it might be chicken, and put it in the dish with other things, and then she tucked them all under a thick crust, and set it down in a tin oven before the fire to bake. And that was not all. She got out some more cornmeal, and made a batter, and put in some sugar and something else which she slipped from a bowl, and which looked in the batter something like raisins, and at the last moment Willie brought her a cup of snow, and she hastily beat it into the cake, or pudding, whichever you might call it, while the children laughed at the idea of making a cake out of snow. This went into the same oven, and pretty soon it rose up light and showed a beautiful brown crust, while the pie was steaming through little fork holes on top and sending out most delicious odours. At the last minute, when the table was set and everything ready to come up, Willie ran up to look out of the scuttle, as he had every hour of daylight since they were buried. In a moment came a wild shout down the ladder. "They're coming! Hurrah for old Tim!" Mamma rushed up and looked out, and saw, to be sure, old Tim slowly coming along over the crust, drawing after him a wood sled on which were two men. "It's papa!" shouted Willie, waving his arms to attract their attention. "Willie!" came back over the snow in tones of agony. "Is that you? Are all well?" "All well," shouted Willie, "and just going to have our Christmas dinner." "Dinner!" echoed papa, who was now nearer. "Where is the house, then?" "Oh, down here," said Willie, "under the snow. But we're all right, only we mustn't let the plum pudding spoil." Looking into the attic, Willie found that mamma had fainted away, and this news brought to her aid papa and the other man, who proved to be a good friend who had come to help. Tim was tied to the chimney, whose thread of smoke had guided them home, and all went down into the dark room. Mrs. Barnes soon recovered, and while Willie dished up the smoking dinner, stories were told on both sides. Mr. Barnes had been trying to get through the snow and to find them all the time, but until the last night had made a stiff crust, he had been unable to do so. Then Mrs. Barnes told her story, winding up with the account of Willie's Christmas dinner. "And if it hadn't been for his keeping up our hearts, I don't know what would have become of us," she said at last. "Well, my son," said papa, "you did take care of mamma, and get up a dinner out of nothing, sure enough. And now we'll eat the dinner, which I am sure is delicious." So it proved to be. Even the cake, or pudding, which Tot christened snow pudding, was voted very nice, and the hickory nuts as good as raisins. When they had finished, Mr. Barnes brought in his packages, gave Tot and the rest some sure enough waisins, and added his Christmas presents to Willie's. But though all were overjoyed, nothing was quite so nice in their eyes as the two live birds. After dinner the two men and Willie dug out passages from the doors through the snow, which had wasted a good deal, uncovered the windows, and made a slanting way to his shed for old Tim. Then for 2 or 3 days Willie made tunnels and little rooms under the snow, and for 2 weeks, while the snow lasted, Nora and Tot had fine times in the little snow playhouses. End of Christmas Under the Snow by Olive Thorne Miller. Story number 30 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Mr. Bluff's Experiences of Holidays by Oliver Bell Bunce. "I hate holidays," said Bachelor Bluff to me with some little irritation on a Christmas a few years ago. Then he paused an instant, after which he resumed. "I don't mean to say that I hate to see people enjoying themselves, but I hate holidays, nevertheless, because to me they're always the saddest and dreariest days of the year. I shudder at the name of holiday. I dread the approach of one, and thank heaven when it is over. I pass through on a holiday the most horrible sensations, the bitterest feelings, the most oppressive melancholy. In fact, I'm not myself at holiday times." "Very strange," I ventured to interpose. "A plague on it," said he, almost with violence. "I'm not inhuman. I don't wish anybody harm. I'm glad people can enjoy themselves, but I hate holidays all the same. You see, this is the reason. I'm a bachelor. I'm without kin. I'm in a place that did not know me at birth, and so when holidays come around there's no place anywhere for me. I have friends, of course. I don't think I've been a very sulky, shut-in, reticent fellow, and there is many a board that has a place for me. But not at Christmas time. At Christmas the dinner is a family gathering, and I've no family. There is such a gathering of kindred on this occasion, such a reunion of family folk, that there is no place for a friend, even if the friend be liked. Christmas, with all its kindliness and charity and goodwill, is, after all, deuced selfish. Each little set gathers within its own circle, and people like me, with no particular circle, are left in the lurch. So you see, on the day of all the days in the year that my heart pines for good cheer, I'm without an invitation." "Oh, it's because I pine for good cheer," said the bachelor sharply, interrupting my attempt to speak, "that I hate holidays. If I were an infernally selfish fellow, I wouldn't hate holidays. I'd go off and have some fun all to myself, somewhere or somehow. But you see, I hate to be in the dark when all the rest of the world is in light. I hate holidays because I ought to be merry and happy on holidays, and can't. Don't tell me," he cried, stopping the word that was on my lips. "I tell you, I hate holidays. The shops look merry, do they, with their bright toys and their green branches? The pantomime is crowded with merry hearts, is it? The circus and the show are brimful of fun and laughter, are they? Well, they all make me miserable. I haven't any pretty-faced girls or bright-eyed boys to take to the circus or the show, and all the nice girls and fine boys of my acquaintance have their uncles and their granddads or their cousins to take them to those places. So, if I go, I must go alone. But I don't go. I can't bear the chill of seeing everybody happy and knowing myself so lonely and desolate. Confound it, sir, I've too much heart to be happy under such circumstances. I'm too humane, sir, and the result is I hate holidays. It's miserable to be out, and yet I can't stay at home, for I get thinking of Christmases past. I can't read, the shadow of my heart makes it impossible. I can't walk, for I see nothing but pictures through the bright windows and happy groups of pleasure seekers. The fact is, I've nothing to do but to hate holidays. But will you not dine with me? Of course I have to plead engagement with my own family circle, and I couldn't quite invite Mr. Bluff home that day when Cousin Charles and his wife and sister Susan and her daughter and 3 of my wife's kin have come in from the country, all to make a merry Christmas with us. I felt sorry, but it was quite impossible, so I wished Mr. Bluff a merry Christmas and hurried homeward through the cold and nipping air. I did not meet Bachelor Bluff again until a week after Christmas of the next year, when I learned some strange particulars of what occurred to him after our parting on the occasion just described. I will let Bachelor Bluff tell his adventure for himself. "I went to church," said he, "and was as sad there as everywhere else. Of course the evergreens were pretty, and the music fine, but all around me were happy groups of people who could scarcely keep down Merry Christmas long enough to do reverence to sacred Christmas. And nobody was alone but me. Every happy paterfamilias in his pew tantalized me, and the whole atmosphere of the place seemed so much better suited to every one else than me that I came away hating holidays worse than ever. Then I went to the play, and sat down in a box all alone by myself. Everybody seemed on the best of terms with everybody else, and jokes and banter passed from one to another with the most good-natured freedom. Everybody but me was in a little group of friends. I was the only person in the whole theatre that was alone. And then there was such clapping of hands, and roars of laughter, and shouts of delight at all the fun going on upon the stage, all of which was rendered doubly enjoyable by everybody having somebody with whom to share and interchange the pleasure, that my loneliness got simply unbearable, and I hated holidays infinitely worse than ever. By 5 o'clock the holiday became so intolerable that I said I'd go and get a dinner, the best dinner the town could provide. A sumptuous dinner for one, a dinner with many courses, with wines of the finest brands, with bright lights, with a cheerful fire, with every condition of comfort, and I'd see if I couldn't for once extract a little pleasure out of a holiday. The handsome dining room at the club looked bright, but it was empty. Who dines at this club on Christmas but lonely bachelors? There was a flutter of surprise when I ordered a dinner, and the few attendants were no doubt glad of something to break the monotony of the hours. My dinner was well served. The spacious room looked lovely, but the white snowy cloths, the rich window hangings, the warm tints of the walls, the sparkle of the fire in the steel grate, gave the room an air of elegance and cheerfulness. And then the table at which I dined was close to the window, and through the partly drawn curtains were visible centres of lonely, cold streets, with bright lights from many a window. It is true, but there was a storm, and snow began whirling through the street. I let my imagination paint the streets as cold and dreary as it would, just to extract a little pleasure by way of contrast from the brilliant room of which I was apparently sole master. I dined well, and recalled in fancy old youthful Christmases, and pledged mentally many an old friend, and my melancholy was mellowing into a low, sad undertone, when, just as I was raising a glass of wine to my lips, I was startled by a picture at the window pane. It was a pale, wild, haggard face, in a great cloud of black hair, pressed against the glass. As I looked, it vanished, with a strange thrill at my heart, which my lips mocked with a derisive sneer. I finished the wine and set down the glass. It was, of course, only a beggar girl that had crept up to the window and stole a glance at the bright scene within, but still the pale face troubled me a little, and threw a fresh shadow on my heart. I filled my glass once more with wine, and was again about to drink, when the face reappeared at the window. It was so white, so thin, with eyes so large, wild and hungry looking, and the black unkempt hair into which the snow had drifted formed so strange and weird a frame to the picture, that I was fairly startled. Replacing untasted the liquor on the table, I rose and went close to the pane. The face had vanished, and I could see no object within many feet of the window. The storm had increased, and the snow was driving in wild gusts through the streets, which were empty, save here and there a hurrying wayfarer. The whole scene was cold, wild, and desolate, and I could not repress a keen thrill of sympathy for the child, whoever it was, whose only Christmas was to watch, in cold and storm, the rich banquet ungratefully enjoyed by the lonely bachelor. I resumed my place at the table, but the dinner was finished, and the wine had no further relish. I was haunted by the vision at the window, and began, with an unreasonable irritation at the interruption, to repeat with fresh warmth my detestation of holidays. One couldn't even dine alone on a holiday with any sort of comfort, I declared. On holidays one was tormented by too much pleasure on one side and too much misery on the other. And then I said, hunting for justification of my dislike of the day, how many other people are, like me, made miserable by seeing the fullness of enjoyment others possess. "Oh, yes, I know," sarcastically replied the bachelor to a comment of mine. "Of course, all magnanimous, generous, and noble-souled people delight in seeing other people made happy, and are quite content to accept this vicarious felicity. But I, you see, and this dear little girl—" "Dear little girl? Oh, I forgot," said Bachelor Bluff, blushing a little, in spite of a desperate effort not to do so. "I didn't tell you. Well, it was so absurd. I kept thinking of the pale, haggard, lonely little girl on the cold, desolate side of the window pane, and the overfed, discontented, lonely old bachelor on the splendid side of the window pane. And I didn't get much happier thinking about it, I can assure you. I drank glass after glass of the wine, not that I enjoyed its flavour any more, but mechanically, as it were, and with a sort of hope thereby to drown unpleasant reminders. I tried to attribute my annoyance in the matter to holidays, and so denounced them more vehemently than ever. I rose once in a while and went to the window, but could see no one to whom the pale face could have belonged. At last, in no very amiable mood, I got up, put on my wrappers, and went out. And the first thing I did was to run against a small figure crouching in the doorway. A face looked up quickly at the rough encounter, and I saw the pale features of the window pane. I was very irritated and angry, and spoke harshly, and then, all at once, I am sure I don't know how it happened, but it flashed upon me that I, of all men, had no right to utter a harsh word to one oppressed with so wretched a Christmas as this poor creature was. I couldn't say another word, but began feeling in my pocket for some money, and then I asked a question or two, and then I don't quite know how it came about. "Isn't it very warm here?" exclaimed Bachelor Bluff, rising and walking about, and wiping the perspiration from his brow. "Well, you see," he resumed nervously, "it was very absurd, but I did believe the girl's story, the old story, you know, of privation and suffering, and just thought I'd go home with the brat and see if what she said was all true. And then I remembered that all the shops were closed, and not a purchase could be made. I went back and persuaded the steward to put up for me a hamper of provisions, which the half wild little youngster helped me carry through the snow, dancing with delight all the way. And isn't this enough?" "Not a bit, Mr. Bluff. I must have the whole story." "I declare," said Bachelor Bluff, "there's no whole story to tell. A widow with children in great need, that was what I found, and they had a feast that night, and a little money to buy them a load of wood and a garment or two the next day, and they were all so bright, and so merry, and so thankful, and so good, that when I got home that night I was mightily amazed that, instead of going to bed sour at holidays, I was in a state of great contentment in regard to holidays. In fact, I was really merry. I whistled, I sang, I do believe I cut a caper. The poor wretches I had left had been so merry over their unlooked for Christmas banquet that their spirits infected mine. And then I got thinking again. Of course, holidays had been miserable to me, I said. What right had a well-to-do, lonely old bachelor, hovering wistfully in the vicinity of happy circles, when all about there were so many people as lonely as he, and yet oppressed with want? "Good gracious!" I exclaimed. "To think of a man complaining of loneliness, with thousands of wretches yearning for his help and comfort, with endless opportunities for work and company, with hundreds of pleasant and delightful things to do! Just to think of it! It put me in a great fury at myself to think of it. I tried pretty hard to escape from myself, and began inventing excuses and all that sort of thing, but I rigidly forced myself to look squarely at my own conduct, and then I reconciled my confidence by declaring that, if ever after that day I hated a holiday again, might my holidays end at once and forever. Did I go and see my protégées again? What a question! Why, well, no matter. If the widow is comfortable now, it is because she has found a way to earn without difficulty enough for her few wants. That's no fault of mine. I would have done more for her, but she wouldn't let me. But just let me tell you about New Year's, the New Year's Day that followed the Christmas I've been describing. It was lucky for me there was another holiday only a week off, bless you. I had so much to do that day I was completely bewildered, and the hours weren't half long enough. I did make a few social calls, but then I hurried them over, and then hastened to my little girl, whose face had already caught a touch of colour, and she, looking quite handsome in her new frock and her ribbons, took me to other poor folk, and, well, that's about the whole story. Oh, as to the next Christmas, well, I didn't dine alone, as you may guess. It was up 3 stairs, that's true, and there was none of that elegance that marked the dinner of the year before. But it was merry and happy and bright. It was a generous, honest, hearty Christmas dinner, that it was, although I do wish the widow hadn't talked so much about the mysterious way a turkey had been left at her door the night before. And Molly, that's the little girl, and I had a rousing appetite. We went to church early. Then we had been down to the 5 Points to carry the poor outcasts there something for their Christmas dinner. In fact, we had done wonders of work, and Molly was in high spirits, and so the Christmas dinner was a great success. Dear me, sir, no, just as you say, holidays are not in the least wearisome any more. Plague on it! When a man tells me now that he hates holidays, I find myself getting very wroth. I pin him by the buttonhole at once, and tell him my experience. The fact is, if I were at dinner on a holiday, and anybody should ask me for a sentiment, I should say, God bless all holidays. End of Mr. Bluff's Experiences of Holidays, by Oliver Bell Bunce. Story number 31 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Master Sandy's Snapdragon by Eldridge S. Brooks. There was just enough of December in the air and of May in the sky to make the Yuletide of the year of grace 1611 a time of pleasure and delight to every boy and girl in merry England, from the princely children in stately Whitehall to the humblest potboy and scullery girl in the hall of the country squire. And in the palace at Whitehall even the cares of state gave place to the sports of this happy season. For that most high and mighty Prince James, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, as you will find him styled in your copy of the old version, or what is known as King James' Bible, loved the Christmas festivities, cranky, crabbed, and crusty though he was, and this year he felt especially gracious. For now, first since the terror of the Guy Fawkes plot, which had come to naught full 7 years before, did the timid king feel secure on his throne. The translation of the Bible, on which so many learned men had been for years engaged, had just been issued from the press of Master Robert Baker, and lastly, much profit was coming into the royal treasury from the new lands in the Indies and across the sea. So it was to be a merry Christmas in the palace at Whitehall. Great were the preparations for its celebration, and the Lord Henry, the handsome, wise, and popular young Prince of Wales, whom men hoped some day to hail as King Henry of England, was to take part in a jolly Christmas masque, in which, too, even the little Prince Charles was to perform for the edification of the court when the mass should be shown in the new and gorgeous banqueting hall of the palace. And tonight it was Christmas Eve. The little Prince Charles and the Princess Elizabeth could scarcely wait for the morrow, so impatient were they to see all the grand devisings that were in store for them. So good Master Sandy, under tutor to the Prince, proposed to wise Archie Armstrong, the king's jester, that they play at Snapdragon for the children in the royal nursery. The Prince and Princess clamoured for the promised game at once, and soon the flicker from the flaming bow lighted up the darkened nursery as around the witch-like cauldron they watched their opportunity to snatch the lucky raisin. The room rang so loudly with fun and laughter that even the king himself, big of head and rickety of legs, shambled in good-humouredly to join in the sport that was giving so much pleasure to the royal boy he so dearly loved, and whom he always called Baby Charles. But what was Snapdragon, you ask? A simple enough game, but dear for many and many a year to English children. A broad and shallow bowl, or dish, half filled with blazing brandy, at the bottom of which lie numerous toothsome raisins, a rare tidbit in those days, and one of these, pierced with a gold button, was known as the lucky raisin. Then, as the flaming brandy flickered and darted from the yawning bowl, even as did the flaming poisoned tongues of the cruel dragon that St. George of England conquered so valiantly, each one of the revellers sought to snatch a raisin from the burning bowl without singe or scar, and he who drew out the lucky raisin was winner and champion, and could claim a boon or reward for his superior skill. Rather a dangerous game, perhaps it seems, but folks were rough players in those old days, and laughed at a burn or a bruise, taking them as part of the fun. So around Master Sandy's Snapdragon danced the royal children, and even the king himself condescended to dip his royal hands in the flames, while Archie Armstrong the jester cried out, "Now fair and softly, brother Jamie, fair and softly, man. There's ne'er a plum in all that plucking so worth the burning, as there was in Signer, Guy Fawkes' Snapdragon, when you proved not to be his lucky raisin." For king's jesters were privileged characters in the old days, and jolly Archie Armstrong could joke with the king on this Guy Fawkes scare as none other dared. And still no one brought out the lucky raisin, though the Princess Elizabeth's fair arm was scotched, and good Master Sandy's peaked beard was singed, and my Lord Montacute had dropped his signet ring in the fiery dragon's mouth, and even his gracious Majesty the King was nursing one of his royal fingers. But just as through the parted arras came young Henry, Prince of Wales, little Prince Charles gave a boyish shout of triumph. "Hey, huzzoy!" he cried. "'Tis mine, 'tis mine! Look, Archie, see, dear Dad, I have the lucky raisin! A boon, good folk, a boon for me!" And the excited lad held aloft the lucky raisin in which gleamed the golden button. "Rarely caught, young York!" cried Prince Henry, clapping his hands in applause. "I came in right in good time, did I not, to give you luck, little brother? And now, lad, what is the boon to be?" And King James, greatly pleased at whatever his dear baby Charles said or did, echoed his eldest son's question. "Ay, lad, 'twas a rare good dip. So crave your boon. What does my bonny boy desire?" But the boy hesitated. What was there that a royal prince, indulged as was he, could wish for or desire? He really could think of nothing, and crossing quickly to his elder brother, whom boy fashion he adored, he whispered, "Ud's fish, Hal, what do I want?" Prince Henry placed his hands upon his brother's shoulder and looked smilingly into his questioning eyes, and all within the room glanced for a moment at the two lads standing thus. And they were well worth looking at. Prince Henry of Wales, tall, comely, open-faced, and well-built, a noble lad of 18, who called to men's minds, so rare Ben Jonson says, the memory of the hero of Agincourt, that other thunderbolt of war, Harry the Fifth, to whom in face you are so like as fate would have you so in worth. Prince Charles, Royal Duke of York, Knight of the Garter and of the Bath, fair in face and form, an active, manly, daring boy of 11, the princely brothers made so fair a sight that the King, jealous and suspicious of Prince Henry's popularity though he was, looked now upon them both with loving eyes. But how those loving eyes would have grown dim with tears, could this fickle, selfish, yet indulgent father have foreseen the sad and bitter fates of both his handsome boys. But fortunately such foreknowledge is not for fathers or mothers, whatever their rank or station, and King James' only thought was one of pride in the two brave lads now whispering together in secret confidence, and into this he speedily broke. "Come, come, baby Charles," he cried, "stand no more parleying, but out and over with the boon ye crave as guerdon for your lucky plum. Ud's fish, lad, out with it. We'd get it for ye though it did rain jeddart staves here in Whitehall." "So please your Grace," said the little prince, bowing low with true courtier-like grace and suavity, "I will, with your permission, crave my boon, as a Christmas favour, at wassail time in to-morrow's revels." And then he passed from the chamber arm in arm with his elder brother, while the King, chuckling greatly over the lad's show of courtliness and ceremony, went into a learned discussion with my Lord of Montacute and Master Sandy as to the origin of the snapdragon, which he, with his customary assumption of deep learning, declared was but a modern paraphrase, my lord, of the fable which telleth how Dan Hercules did kill the flaming dragon of Hesperia, and did then, with the apple of that famous orchard, make a fiery dish of burning apple brandy, which he did name Snapdragon. For King James the Sixth of Scotland and I of England was, you see, something too much of what men call a pedant. Christmas morning rose bright and glorious. A light hoar frost whitened the ground, and the keen December air nipped the noses as it hurried the song notes of the score of little waifs who gathered beneath the windows of the big palace, sung for the happy awakening of the young Prince Charles, their Christmas carol and their Christmas Noel. A child this day is born, a child of great renown, most worthy of a sceptre and a crown. Noel, 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 sing we may, because the King of all kings was born this blessed day. These tidings shepherds heard, in field watching their fold, whereby an angel unto them at night revealed and told. Noel, 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 sing we may, because the King of all kings was born this blessed day. He brought unto them tidings of gladness and of mirth, which cometh to all people by this holy infant's birth. Noel, 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 sing we may, because the King of all kings was born this blessed day. The blessed day wore on. Gifts and sports filled the happy hours. In the royal banqueting hall the Christmas dinner was royally set and served, and king and queen and princes, with attendant nobles and holiday guests, partook of the strong dishes of those old days of hearty appetites. A shield of brawn with mustard, boiled capon, a chine of beef roasted, a neat's tongue roasted, a pig roasted, chewits baked, goose, swan, and turkey roasted, a haunch of venison roasted, a pasty of venison, a kid stuffed with pudding, an olive pie, capons and dowsets, salads and fricassees, all these and much more, with strong beer and spiced ale to wash the dinner down, crowned the royal board, while the great boar's head and the Christmas pie, borne in with great parade, were placed on the table joyously decked with holly and rosemary and bay. It was a great ceremony, this bringing in of the boar's head. First came an attendant, so the old record tells us, attired in a horseman's coat, with a boar spear in his hand. Next to him another huntsman in green, with a bloody falchion drawn. Next to him 2 pages in taffeta sarcenet, each of them with a mess of mustard. Next to whom came he that carried the boar's head, crossed with a green silk scarf, by which hung the empty scabbard of the falchion which was carried before him. After the dinner, the boar's head having been wrestled for by some of the royal yeomen, came the wassail, or health drinking. Then the king said, "And now, baby Charles, let us hear the boon you were to crave of us at wassail, as a guerdon for the holder of the lucky raisin in Master Sandy's snapdragon." And the little 11-year-old prince stood up before the company in all his brave attire, glanced at his brother, Prince Henry, and then facing the king said boldly, "I pray you, my father and my liege, grant me, as the boon I ask, the freeing of Walter Raleigh." At this altogether startling and unlooked for request, amazement and consternation appeared on the faces around the royal banqueting board, and the king put down his untasted tankard of spiced ale, while surprise, doubt, and anger quickly crossed the royal face. For Sir Walter Raleigh, the favourite of Queen Elizabeth, the Lord Proprietor and colonizer of the American colonies, and the sworn foe to Spain, had been now close prisoner in the Tower for more than 9 years, hated and yet dreaded by his fickle King James, who dared not put him to death for fear of the people to whom the name and valour of Raleigh were dear. "Hoot, child!" cried the king at length, spluttering wrathfully in the broadest of his native Scotch, as was his habit when angered or surprised. "Ye reckless fou, wha hae put ye to sic a jackanape trick? Dinna ye ken that sic a boon is nae for a laddie like you to meddle wi'? Wha hae put ye to't, I say?" But ere the young prince could reply, the stately and solemn-faced ambassador of Spain, the Count of Gondomar, arose in the place of honour he filled as a guest of the king. "My lord king," he said, "I beg your majesty to bear in memory your pledge to my gracious master, King Philip of Spain, that naught save grave cause should lead you to liberate from just durance that arch enemy of Spain, the Lord Raleigh." "But you did promise me, my lord," said Prince Charles hastily, "and you have told me that the royal pledge is not to be lightly broken." "Ma certie, lad," said King James, "ye maun aye learn that there is nae rule wi'out its exceptions." And then he added, "A pledge to a boy in play, like to ours of yester eve, baby Charles, is not to be kept when matters of state conflict." Then turning to the Spanish ambassador, he said, "Rest content, my lord Count. This recreant Raleigh shall not yet be loosed." "But, my liege," still persisted the boy prince. "My brother Hal did say." The wrath of the king burst out afresh. "Aye, said you so, brother Hal, indeed?" he cried. "I thought the wind blew from that quarter," and he angrily faced his eldest son. "So, sir, 'twas you that did urge this foolish boy to work your traitorous purpose in such coward guise." "My liege," said Prince Henry, rising in his place, "traitor and coward are words I may not calmly hear even from my father and my king. You wrong me foully when you use them thus, for though I do bethink me that the Tower is but a sorry cage in which to keep so grandly plumed a bird as my Lord of Raleigh, I did but seek—" "Aye, you did but seek to curry favour with the craven crowd," burst out the now thoroughly angry king, always jealous of the popularity of this brave young Prince of Wales. "And am I, sir, to be badgered and browbeaten in my own palace by such a thriftless ne'er do weel as you, ungrateful boy, who seekest to gain preference with the people in this realm before your liege lord the king? Quit my presence, sir, and that instanter, ere that I do send you to spend your Christmas where your great grandfather, King Henry, bade his astrologer spend his, in the Tower, there to keep company with your fitting comrade, Raleigh the traitor." Without a word in reply to this outburst, with a son's submission, but with a royal dignity, Prince Henry bent his head before his father's decree, and withdrew from the table, followed by the gentlemen of his household. But ere he could reach the arrased doorway, Prince Charles sprang to his side and cried valiantly, "Nay, then, if he goes, so do I. 'Twas surely but a Christmas joke, and of my own devising. Spoil not our revel, my gracious liege and father, on this of all the year's red letter days, by turning my thoughtless frolic into such bitter threatening. I did but seek to test the worth of Master Sandy's lucky raisin by asking for as wildly great a boon as might be thought upon. Brother Hal, too, did but give me his advising in joke, even as I did seek it. None here, my royal father, would brave your sovereign displeasure by any unknightly or unloyal scheme." The gentle and dignified words of the young prince, for Charles Stuart, though despicable as a king, was ever loving and loyal as a friend, were as oil upon the troubled waters. The ruffled temper of the ambassador of Spain, who in after years really did work Raleigh's downfall and death, gave place to courtly bows, and the king's quick anger melted away before the dearly loved voice of his favourite son. "Nay, resume your place, son Hal," he said, "and you, gentlemen all, resume your seats, I pray. I, too, did but jest, as did baby Charles here. A sad young wag, I fear me, is this same young prince." But as after the wassail came the Christmas masque, in which both princes bore their parts, Prince Charles said to Archie Armstrong, the king's jester, "Faith, good Archie, now is Master Sandy's snapdragon but a false beast withal, and his lucky raisin is but an evil fruit that pays not for the plucking." And wise old Archie only wagged his head and answered, "Odzooks, cousin Charlie, Christmas raisins are not the only fruit that burns the fingers in the plucking, and mayhap you too may live to know that a mettlesome horse never stumbleth but when he is reined." Poor cousin Charlie did not then understand the full meaning of the wise old jester's words, but he did live to learn their full intent. For when, in after years, his people sought to curb his tyrannies with a revolt that ended only with his death upon the scaffold, outside this very banqueting house at Whitehall, Charles Stuart learned, all too late, that a mettlesome horse needed sometimes to be reined, and heard, too late as well, the stern declaration of the Commons of England that no chief officer might presume for the future to contrive the enslaving and destruction of the nation with impunity. But though many a merry and many a happy day had the young Prince Charles before the dark tragedy of his sad and sorry manhood, he lost all faith in lucky raisins. Not for 3 years did Sir Walter Raleigh, whom both the princes secretly admired, obtain release from the Tower, and ere 3 more years were past his head fell as a forfeit to the stern demands of Spain. And Prince Charles often declared that naught indeed could come from meddling with luck saving burnt fingers, Even he said, as came to me that profitless night when I sought a boon for snatching the lucky raisin from good Master Sandy's Christmas snapdragon. End of Master Sandy's Snapdragon by Eldridge S. Brooks. Story number 32 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. A Christmas Fairy by John Strange Winter. It was getting very near to Christmas time, and all the boys at Miss Ware's school were talking about going home for the holidays. "I shall go to the Christmas festival," said Bertie Fellows, "and my mother will have a party, and my aunt will give another. Oh, I shall have a splendid time at home." "My Uncle Bob is going to give me a pair of skates," remarked Harry Wadham. "My father is going to give me a bicycle," put in George Alderson. "Will you bring it back to school with you?" asked Harry. "Oh, yes, if Miss Ware doesn't say no." "Well, Tom," cried Bertie, "where are you going to spend your holidays?" "I'm going to stay here," answered Tom in a very forlorn voice. "Here at school? Oh, dear, why can't you go home?" "I can't go home to India," answered Tom. "Nobody said you could, but haven't you any relatives anywhere?" Tom shook his head. "Only in India," he said sadly. "Poor fellow, that's hard luck for you. I'll tell you what it is, boys, if I couldn't go home for the holidays, especially at Christmas, I think I would just sit down and die." "Oh, no, you wouldn't," said Tom. "You would get ever so homesick, but you wouldn't die. You'd just get through somehow, and hope something would happen before next year, or that some kind fairy would—" "There are no fairies nowadays," said Bertie. "See here, Tom, I'll write and ask my mother to invite you to go home with me for the holidays." "Will you really?" "Yes, I will, and if she says yes, we shall have such a splendid time. We live in London, you know, and have lots of parties and fun." "Perhaps she'll say no," suggested poor little Tom. "My mother isn't the kind that says no," Bertie declared loudly. In a few days' time a letter arrived from Bertie's mother. The boy opened it eagerly. It said: "My own dear Bertie, I am very sorry to tell you that little Alice is ill with scarlet fever, and so you cannot come for your holidays. I would have been glad to have you bring your little friend with you if all had been well here. Your father and I have decided that the best thing that you can do is to stay at Miss Ware's. We shall send your Christmas present to you as well as we can. It will not be like coming home, but I am sure you will try to be happy, and make me feel that you are helping me in this sad time. Dear little Alice is very ill indeed. Tell Tom that I am sending you a box for both of you, with 2 of everything, and tell him that it makes me so much happier to know that you will not be alone. Your own mother." When Bertie Fellows received this letter, which ended all his Christmas hopes and joys, he hid his face upon his desk and sobbed aloud. The lonely boy from India, who sat next to him, tried to comfort his friend in every way he could think of. He patted his shoulder and whispered many kind words to him. At last Bertie put the letter into Tom's hand. "Read it," he sobbed. So then Tom understood the cause of Bertie's grief. "Don't fret over it," he said at last. "It might be worse. Why, your father and mother might be thousands of miles away like mine are. When Alice is better, you will be able to go home, and it will help your mother if she thinks you are almost as happy as if you could go now." Soon Miss Ware came to tell Bertie how sorry she was for him. "After all," said she, smiling down on the 2 boys, "it is an ill wind that blows nobody good. Poor Tom has been expecting to spend his holidays alone, and now he will have a friend with him. Try to look on the bright side, Bertie, and to remember how much worse it would have been if there had been no boy to stay with you." "I can't help being disappointed, Miss Ware," said Bertie, his eyes filling with tears. "No, you would be a strange boy if you were not. But I want you to try to think of your poor mother, and write her as cheerfully as you can." "Yes," answered Bertie, but his heart was too full to say more. The last day of the term came, and one by one, or two by two, the boys went away, until only Bertie and Tom were left in the great house. It had never seemed so large to either of them before. "It's miserable," groaned poor Bertie, as they strolled into the schoolroom. "Just think if we were on our way home now, how different!" "Just think if I had been left here by myself," said Tom. "Yes," said Bertie, "but you know, when one wants to go home, he never thinks of the boys that have no home to go to." The evening passed, and the two boys went to bed. They told stories to each other for a long time before they could go to sleep. That night they dreamed of their homes, and felt very lonely. Yet each tried to be brave, and so another day began. This was the day before Christmas. Quite early in the morning came the great box of which Bertie's mother had spoken in her letter. Then, just as dinner had come to an end, there was a peal of the bell, and a voice was heard asking for Tom Egerton. Tom sprang to his feet, and flew to greet a tall, handsome lady, crying, "Aunt Laura! Aunt Laura!" And Laura explained that she and her husband had arrived in London only the day before. "I was so afraid, Tom," she said, "that we should not get here until Christmas Day was over, and that you would be disappointed. So I would not let your mother write you that we were on our way home. You must get your things packed up at once, and go back with me to London. Then Uncle and I will give you a splendid time." For a minute or two Tom's face shone with delight. Then he caught sight of Bertie, and turned to his aunt. "Dear Aunt Laura," he said, "I am very sorry, but I can't go." "Can't go? And why not?" "Because I can't go and leave Bertie here all alone," he said stoutly. "When I was going to be alone, he wrote and asked his mother to let me go home with him. She could not have either of us, because Bertie's sister has scarlet fever. He has to stay here, and he has never been away from home at Christmas time before, and I can't go away and leave him by himself, Aunt Laura." For a minute Aunt Laura looked at the boy as if she could not believe him. Then she caught him in her arms and kissed him. "You dear little boy, you shall not leave him. You shall bring him along, and we shall all enjoy ourselves together. Bertie, my boy, you are not very old yet, but I am going to teach you a lesson as well as I can. It is that kindness is never wasted in this world." And so Bertie and Tom found that there was such a thing as a fairy after all. End of A Christmas Fairy by John Strange Winter. Story number 33 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. The Greatest of These by Joseph Mills Hanson. The outside door swung open suddenly, letting a cloud of steam into the small, hot kitchen. Charlie Moore, a milk pail in one hand, a lantern in the other, closed the door behind him with a bang, set the pail on the table, and stamped the snow from his feet. "There's the milk, and I near froze getting it," said he, addressing his partner, who was chopping potatoes in a pan on the stove. "Dose fried potatoes vas burnt," said the other, wielding his knife vigorously. Why didn't you watch 'em instead of reading your old Scandinavian paper?" answered Charlie, hanging his overcoat and cap behind the door, and laying his mittens under the stove to dry. Then he drew up a chair, and with much exertion pulled off his heavy felt boots, and stood them beside his mittens. "Why didn't you shut the gate after you came in from town? The cows got out and went up to Ronny's, and I had to chase 'em. 'Tain't any joke running round after cows such a night as this." Having relieved his mind of its grievance, Charlie sat down before the oven door, and, opening it, laid a stick of wood along its outer edge, and thrust his feet into the hot interior, propping his heels against the stick. "Look out for dese hair biscuits!" exclaimed his partner anxiously. "Oh, hang the biscuits!" was Charlie's hasty answer. "I'll watch 'em. Why didn't you?" "I tank I forgit 'em." "Well, you don't want to forget. A feller forgot his clothes once, and he got froze." "I guess dose taller vas ketch in a spring snowstorm. Vas dose biscuits done, Charlie?" "You bet they are, Nels," replied Charlie, looking into the pan. "Den supper vas ready. Yum on." Nels picked up the frying pan and Charlie the biscuits, and set them on the oilcloth covered table, where a plate of butter, a jar of plum jelly, and a coffee pot were already standing. Outside the frozen kitchen window the snow-covered fields and meadows stretched, glistening and silent, away to the dark belt of timber by the river. Along the deep-rutted road in front a belated lumber wagon passed slowly, the wheels crunching through the packed snow with a wavering, incessant shriek. The two men hitched their chairs up to the table, and without ceremony helped themselves liberally to the steaming food. For a few moments they seemed oblivious to everything but the demands of hunger. The potatoes and biscuits disappeared with surprising rapidity, washed down by large draughts of coffee. These men, labouring steadily through the short daylight hours in the dry, cold air of the Dakota winter, were like engines whose fires had burned low. They were taking fuel. Presently, the first keen edge of appetite satisfied, they ate more slowly, and Nels, straightening up with a sigh, spoke. "I seen Sigurd in town to-day. He vants 150 for dose team." "Come down, hey?" commented Charlie. "Well, they're worth that. We'd better take 'em, Nels. We'll need 'em in the spring if we break the North 40." "Yas, it's a nice team," agreed Nels. "Half us drivin' home to-day." "Is he hauling corn?" "Na, he had his kids oop gettin' Christmas presents." "By gracious, to-morrow's Christmas!" Nels nodded solemnly, as one possessing superior knowledge. Charlie became thoughtful. "We'll come in sort of slim on it here, I reckon, Nels. Christmas ain't right, somehow, out here. Back in Wisconsin, where I came from, there's where you get your Christmas." Charlie spoke with the unswerving prejudice of mankind for the land of his birth. "Yas, dose bin right. In de ole country dey havin' great times Christmas." Their thoughts were all bent now upon the holiday scenes of the past. As they finished the meal, and cleared away and washed the dishes, they related incidents of their boyhood's time, compared, reiterated, and embellished. As they talked they grew jovial and laughed often. "The ski broke, and you went over Kerplunk, hey? Ha, ha! That reminds me of one time in Wisconsin." Something of the joyous spirit of the Christmastide seemed to have entered into this little farmhouse set in the midst of the lonely white fields. In the hearts of these men, moving about in their dim-lighted room, was re-echoed the joyous murmur of the great world without, the gaiety of the throngs in city streets, where the brilliant shop windows, rich with holiday spoils, smile out upon the passing crowd, and the clang of street cars and roar of traffic mingle with the cries of street vendors. The work finished, they drew their chairs to the stove and filled their pipes, still talking. "Well, well," said Charlie, after the laugh occasioned by one of Nell's droll stories had subsided, "it's nice to think of those old times. I'd hate to have been one of these kids that can't have any fun, Christmas or any other time." "I guess der ain't anybody much dot don't have somethin' dis times a year." "Oh, yes, there are, Nels. You bet there are." Charlie nodded at his partner with serious conviction. "Now there's the Ronneys." He waved his pipe over his shoulder. "The old man told me tonight, when I was up after the cows, that he's sold all the crop except what they need for feedin', wheat and corn and everything, and some hogs besides, and ain't got hardly enough now for feed and clothes for all that family. The rent and the lumber he had to buy to build the new barn after the old one burnt ate up the money like fury." He kind of laughed, and said he guessed the children won't get much Christmas this year. I didn't think about its being so close when he told me. "No Christmas?" Nell's round eyes widened with astonishment. "I t'ink dose been pooty bad." He studied the subject for a few moments, his stolid face suddenly grown thoughtful. Charlie stared at the stove. Far away by the river a lonely coyote set up his quick howling yelp. "Dere's been 7 kids oop dere," said Nels at last, glancing up as if for corroboration. "Yes, 7," agreed Charlie. "Say, do ve need Sigurd's team very pad?" "Well, now that depends," said Charlie. "Why not?" "Nothin'. Only I vas t'inkin' ve might take some of das vheat we was goin' to sell, and "Yep, what?" "And dump it on Ronny's granary floor tonight after der's been asleep." Charlie stared at his companion for a moment in silence. Then he rose, and approaching Nels, examined his partner's face with solemn scrutiny. "By the great horn spoon," he announced finally, "you've got a head on you like a balloon, my boy. Keep on getting ideas like that, and you'll land in Congress or the Poor Farm before many years." Then, abandoning his pretence of gravity, he slapped the other on the back. "Why didn't I think of that? It's the best yet. Seigert's team! Oh, hang Seigert's team! We don't need it. We'll have a little Merry Christmas out of this yet, only they mustn't know where it came from. I'll write a note and stick it under the door. You'll find some merry wheat. No, that ain't it. You'll find some wheat in the granary to give the kids a Merry Christmas with. Signed, Santa Claus." He wrote out the message in the air with a pointing forefinger. He had entered into the spirit of the thing eagerly. "It's 9:30 now," he went on, looking at the clock. "It'll be 11 time we get the stuff loaded and hauled up there. Let's go out and get at it. Luckily the Bobs are on the wagon. They don't make such a racket as wheels." He took the lantern from its nail behind the door and lighted it, after which he put on his boots, cap, and mittens, and flung his overcoat across his shoulders. Nels, meanwhile, had put on his outer garments also. "Shut up the stove, Nels." Charlie blew out the light and opened the door. "There, hang it!" he exclaimed, turning back. "I forgot the note. Ought to be in ink, I suppose. Well, never mind now. We won't put on any style about it." He took down a pencil from the shelf, and, extracting a bit of wrapping paper from a bundle behind the wood box, wrote the note by the light of the lantern. "There, I guess that will do," he said finally. "Come on." Outside the night air was cold and bracing, and in the black vault of the sky the winter constellations flashed and throbbed. The shadows of the two men, thrown by the lantern, bobbed huge and grotesque across the snow and among the bare branches of the cottonwoods as they moved toward the barn. "I tank ve put on dose extra side pords and make her an even 50 pushel," said Nels, after they had backed the wagon up to the granary door. "Ve might as vell do it oopright, skince ve're at it." Having carried out this suggestion, the two shovelled steadily, with short intervals of rest, for 3/4 of an hour, the dark pile of grain in the wagon box rising gradually until it stood flush with the top. Good it was to look upon, cold and soft and yielding to the touch. This heaped up wealth from the inexhaustible treasure house of the mighty West. Charles and Nels felt something of this as they viewed the results of their labours for a moment before hitching up the team. "It's a number 1 hard," said Charlie, picking up a handful and sifting it slowly through his fingers, "and it'll fetch 74 cents. But you can't raise any worse on this old farm of ours if you try," he added a little proudly, "nor anywhere else in the Jim River Valley for that matter." As they approached the Roney place, looking dim and indistinct in the darkness, their voices hushed apprehensively, and the noise of the sled runners slipping through the snow seemed to them to increase from a purr to a roar. "Here, stop a minute," whispered Nels in agony of discovery. "Ve're making an awful noise. I'll get und take a peek." He slipped away and cautiously approached the house. "Et's all right," he whispered hoarsely, returning after a moment. "Dey're all asleep. But go easy. I tank ve best go easy." They seemed burdened all at once with the consciences of criminals, and went forward with almost guilty timidity. "Thunder! Dere's a bump. Vy don't you drive garvooler, Charlie? Drive yourself if you think you can do any better." As they came into the yard, a dog suddenly ran out from the barn, barking furiously. Charlie reined up with an ejaculation of despair. "Look there, the dog! We're done for now, sure. Stop him, Nels. Throw something at him." The noise seemed to their excited ears louder than the crash of artillery. Nels threw a piece of snow crust. The dog ran back a few steps, but his barking did not diminish. "Here, hold the lines. I'll try to catch him." Charlie jumped from the wagon and approached the dog with coaxing words. "Come, doggie, good doggie. Nice boy. Come." His maneuver, however, merely served to increase the animal's frenzy. As Charlie approached, the dog retired slowly toward the house, his head thrown back, and his rapid barking increased to a long-drawn howl. "Good boy, come." "Bother the brute! He'll wake up the whole household." "Nice doggie. Fee." The noise, however, had no apparent effect upon the occupants of the house. All remained as dark and silent as ever. "Charlie, Charlie, let him go!" cried Nels in a voice smothered with laughter. "I go in dose barn. Maybe he'll chase me." His hope was full founded. The dog, observing this treacherous occupation by the enemy of his last harbour of refuge, gave pursuit, and disappeared within the door, which Charlie, hard behind him, closed with a bang. There was the sound of a hurried scuffle within. The dog's barking gave place to terrified whinings, which in turn were suddenly quenched to a choking murmur. "Come in, Charlie, kvick! You got him?" queried Charlie, opening the door cautiously. "Did he bite you?" "Nay, yes, ma mitten. Get a sack or something to tie him oop in." A sack was procured from somewhere, into which the dog, now silenced from sheer exhaustion and fright, was unceremoniously thrust, after which the sack was tied and flung into the wagon. This formidable obstacle overcome, and the Ronneys still slumbering peacefully, the rest was easy. The granary door was pried open, and the wheat shovelled hurriedly in upon the empty floor. Charlie then crept up to the house and slipped his note under the door. The sack was lifted from the now empty wagon and opened before the barn, whereupon its occupant slipped meekly out and retreated at once to a far corner, seemingly too much incensed at his discourteous treatment even to fling a volley of farewell barks at his departing captors. "Vell," remarked Nels with a sigh of relief as they gained the road, "I denk dose Ronneys pelieve in Santa Claus now. Dose bin funny vay for Santa Claus to coom." Charlie's laugh was good to hear. "He didn't exactly come down the chimney, that's a fact, but it'll do at a pinch. We ought to have told them to get a present for the dog, collar and chain. I reckon he wouldn't hardly be thankful for it, though, eh?" "I guess not. He likes to haf hees night to himself." "Well, we had our fun, anyway. Sort of puts me in mind of an old Wisconsin, somehow." From far off over the valley, with its dismantled cornfields and snow-covered haystacks, beyond the ice-bound river, floated slow and sonorous the mellow clanging of church bells. They were ushering in the Christmas morn. Overhead the starlit heavens glistened, brooding and mysterious, looking down with luminous, loving eyes upon these humble sons of men doing a good deed, from the impulse of simple, generous hearts, as upon that other Christmas morning long ago, when the Jewish shepherds, guarding their flocks by night, read in their shining depths that in Bethlehem of Judea the Christ child was born. The rising sun was touching the higher hilltops with a faint rush of crimson the next morning, when the back door of the Roney house opened with a creak, and Mr. Roney, still heavy-eyed with sleep, stumbled out upon the porch, stretched his arms above his head, yawned, blinked at the dazzling snow, and then shambled off toward the barn. As he approached, the dog ran eagerly out, gambolled meekly around his feet, and caressed his boots. The man patted him kindly. "Hello, old boy. What were you yapping around so for last night, huh? Grain thieves? You needn't worry about them. There ain't nothing left for them to steal. No, sir. If they got into that granary, they'd have to take a lantern along to find a pint of wheat. I don't suppose," he added reflectively, "that I could scrape up enough to feed the chickens this morning, but I guess I might well see." He passed over to the little building. What he saw when he looked within seemed for a moment to produce no impression upon him whatever. He stared at the hillock of grain in motionless silence. Finally Mr. Roney gave utterance to a single word, "Gee Whillikins!" and started for the house on a run. Into the kitchen, where his wife was just starting the fire, the excited man burst in like a whirlwind. "Come out here, Mary!" he cried. "Come out here, quick!" The worthy woman, unaccustomed to such demonstrations, looked at him in amazement. "For goodness' sake, what's come over you, Pete Roney?" she exclaimed. "Are you daft? Don't make such a noise. You'll wake the young ones, and I don't want them waked till need be, with no Christmas for 'em, poor little things." "Never mind the young uns," he replied. "Come on." As they passed out, he noticed the slip of paper under the door and picked it up without comment. He charged down upon the granary, his wife, with a shawl over her head, close behind. She peered in apprehensively at first, then with eyes of widening wonder. "Why, Peter," she said, turning to him. "Why, Peter, what does I thought " "You thought," he broke in. "Me, too. But it ain't so. It means that we've got some of the best neighbours that ever was, a thinking of our young uns this way. Read that!" And he thrust the paper into her hand. "Why, Peter!" she ejaculated again weakly. Then suddenly she turned, and laying her head on his shoulder, began to sob softly. "There, there," he said, patting her arm awkwardly. "Don't you go and cry now. Let's just be thankful to the good Lord for putting such fellers into the world as them fellers down the road. And now you run in and hurry up breakfast while I do up the chores. Then we'll hitch up and get into town 'fore the stores close. Tell the young 'uns Santy didn't get round last night with their things, but we've got word to meet him in town. Hey? Yes, I saw just the kind of sled Pete wants when I was up yesterday, and that china doll for Molly. Yes, tell 'em anything you want. 'Twon't be too big. Santy Claus has come to Ronny's ranch this year, sure." End of The Greatest of These by Joseph Mills Hanson. Story 24 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Little Gretchen and the Wooden Shoe by Elizabeth Harrison. The following story is one of many which has drifted down to us from the story-loving nurseries and hearthstones of Germany. I cannot recall when I first had it told to me as a child, varied, of course, by different tellers, but always leaving that sweet, tender inspiration of God's loving care for the least of his children. I have since read different versions of it in at least a half dozen story books for children. Once upon a time, a long time ago, far away across the great ocean, in a country called Germany, there could be seen a small log hut on the edge of a great forest, whose fir trees extended for miles and miles to the north. This little house, made of heavy hewn logs, had but one room in it. A rough pine door gave entrance to this room, and a small square window admitted the light. At the back of the house was built an old-fashioned stone chimney, out of which in winter usually curled a thin, blue smoke, showing that there was not very much fire within. Small as the house was, it was large enough for the two people who lived in it. I want to tell you a story today about these two people. One was an old, gray-haired woman, so old that the little children of the village, nearly half a mile away, often wondered whether she had come into the world with the huge mountains and the great fir trees which stood like giants back of her small hut. Her face was wrinkled all over with deep lines, which, if the children could only have read aright, would have told them of many years of cheerful, happy self-sacrifice, of loving, anxious watching beside sick beds, of quiet endurance of pain, of many a day of hunger and cold, and of 1,000 deeds of unselfish love for other people. But, of course, they could not read this strange handwriting. They only knew that she was old and wrinkled, and that she stooped as she walked. None of them seemed to fear her, for her smile was always cheerful, and she had a kindly word for each of them if they chanced to meet her on her way to and from the village. With this old, old woman lived a very little girl. So bright and happy was she that the travellers who passed by the lonesome little house on the edge of the forest often thought of a sunbeam as they saw her. These two people were known in the village as Granny Goodyear and Little Gretchen. The winter had come, and the frost had snapped off many of the smaller branches from the pine trees in the forest. Gretchen and her granny were up by daybreak each morning. After their simple breakfast of oatmeal, Gretchen would run to the little closet and fetch Granny's old woolen shawl, which seemed almost as old as Granny herself. Gretchen always claimed the right to put the shawl over her Granny's head, even though she had to climb onto the wooden bench to do it. After carefully pinning it under Granny's chin, she gave her a good-bye kiss, and Granny started out for her morning's work in the forest. This work was nothing more nor less than the gathering up of the twigs and branches which the autumn winds and winter frosts had thrown upon the ground. These were carefully gathered into a large bundle, which Granny tied together with a strong linen band. She then managed to lift the bundle to her shoulder, and trudged off to the village with it. Here she sold the faggots for kindling wood to the people of the village. Sometimes she would only get a few pence each day, and sometimes a dozen or more, but on this money little Gretchen and she managed to live. They had their home, and the forest kindling furnished the wood for the fire which kept them warm in cold weather. In the summer time Granny had a little garden at the back of the hut, where she raised, with little Gretchen's help, a few potatoes and turnips and onions. These she carefully stored away for winter use. To this meagre supply, the pennies gained by selling the twigs from the forest, added the oatmeal for Gretchen, and a little black coffee for Granny. Meat was a thing they never thought of having. It cost too much money. Still, Granny and Gretchen were very happy, because they love each other dearly. Sometimes Gretchen would be left alone all day long in the hut, because Granny would have some work to do in the village after selling her bundle of sticks and twigs. It was during these long days that little Gretchen had taught herself to sing the song which the wind sang to the pine branches. In the summer time she learned the chirp and twitter of the birds, until her voice might almost be mistaken for a bird's voice. She learned to dance as the swaying shadows did, and even to talk to the stars which shone through the little square window when Granny came home too late or too tired to talk. Sometimes, when the weather was fine, or her Granny had an extra bundle of newly knitted stockings to take to the village, she would let little Gretchen go along with her. It chanced that one of these trips to the town came just the week before Christmas, and Gretchen's eyes were delighted by the sight of the lovely Christmas trees which stood in the windows of the village store. It seemed to her that she would never tire of looking at the knit dolls, the woolly lambs, the little wooden shops with their queer painted men and women in them, and all the other fine things. She had never owned a plaything in her whole life. Therefore, toys which you and I would not think much of, seemed to her to be very beautiful. That night, after their supper of baked potatoes was over, and little Gretchen had cleared away the dishes and swept up the hearth, because Granny dear was so tired, she brought her own small wooden stool and placed it very near Granny's feet, and sat down upon it, folding her hands on her lap. Granny knew that this meant she wanted to talk about something, so she smilingly laid away the large Bible which she had been reading, and took up her knitting, which is as much as to say, "Well, Gretchen dear, Granny is ready to listen." "Granny," said Gretchen slowly, "it's almost Christmas time, isn't it?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny, "only 5 more days now," and then she sighed. But little Gretchen was so happy that she did not notice Granny's sigh. "What do you think, Granny, I'll get this Christmas?" said she, looking up eagerly into Granny's face. "Ah, child, child," said Granny, shaking her head, "you'll have no Christmas this year. We are too poor for that." "Oh, but Granny," interrupted little Gretchen, "think of all the beautiful toys we saw in the village today. Surely Santa Claus has sent enough for every little child." "Ah, dearie," said Granny, "those toys are for people who can pay money for them, and we have no money to spend for Christmas toys." "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, "perhaps some of the little children who live in the great house on the hill at the other end of the village will be willing to share some of their toys with me. They will be so glad to give some to a little girl who has none." Dear child," said Granny, leaning forward and stroking the soft, shining hair of the little girl. "Your heart is full of love. You would be glad to bring a Christmas to every child. But their heads are so full of what they're going to get that they forget all about anybody else but themselves." Then she sighed and shook her head. "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, her bright, happy tone of voice growing a little less joyous, "perhaps the dear Santa Claus will show some of the village children how to make presents that do not cost money, and some of them may surprise me Christmas morning with a present. And, Granny dear," added she, springing up from her low stool, "can't I gather some of the pine branches and take them to the old sick man who lives in the house by the mill, so that he can have the sweet smell of our pine forest in his room all Christmas Day?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny, "you may do what you can to make the Christmas bright and happy, but you must not expect any present yourself." "Oh, but Granny," said little Gretchen, her face brightening, "you forget all about the shining Christmas angels, who came down to earth and sang their wonderful song the night the beautiful Christ child was born. They are so loving and good that they will not forget any little child. I shall ask my dear stars tonight to tell them of us. You know," she added, with a look of relief, "the stars are so very high that they must know the angels quite well, as they come and go with their messages from the loving God." Granny sighed as she half whispered, "Poor child, poor child!" But Gretchen threw her arms round Granny's neck and gave her a hearty kiss, saying as she did so, "Oh, Granny, Granny, you don't talk to the stars often enough, else you wouldn't be sad at Christmas time." Then she danced all around the room, whirling her little skirts about her to show Granny how the wind had made the snow dance that day. She looked so droll and funny that Granny forgot her cares and worries and laughed with little Gretchen over her new snow dance. The days passed on, and the morning before Christmas Eve came. Gretchen, having tidied up the little room, for Granny had taught her to be a careful little housewife, was off to the forest, singing a birdlike song, almost as happy and free as the birds themselves. She was very busy that day, preparing a surprise for Granny. First, however, she gathered the most beautiful of the fir branches within her reach to take the next morning to the old sick man who lived by the mill. The day was all too short for the happy little girl. When Granny came trudging wearily home that night, she found the frame of the doorway covered with green pine branches. "It's to welcome you, Granny! It's to welcome you!" cried Gretchen. "Our old dear home wanted to give you a Christmas welcome. Don't you see? The branches of evergreen make it look as if it were smiling all over, and it is trying to say, 'A happy Christmas' to you, Granny." Granny laughed and kissed the little girl. As they opened the door and went in together, here was a new surprise for Granny. The four posts of the wooden bed, which stood in one corner of the room, had been trimmed by the busy little fingers with smaller and more flexible branches of the pine trees. A small bouquet of red mountain ash berries stood at each side of the fireplace, and these, together with the trim posts of the bed, gave the plain old room quite a festival look. Gretchen laughed and clapped her hands and danced about until the house seemed full of music to poor, tired Granny, whose heart had been sad as she turned toward their home that night, thinking of the disappointment which must come to loving little Gretchen the next morning. After supper was over, little Gretchen drew her stool up to Granny's side, and laying her soft little hands on Granny's knee, asked to be told once again the story of the coming of the Christ child. How the night that he was born the beautiful angels had sung their wonderful song, and how the whole sky had become bright with a strange and glorious light, never seen by the people of earth before. Gretchen had heard the story many, many times before, but she never grew tired of it. And now that Christmas Eve had come again, the happy little child wanted to hear it once more. When Granny had finished telling it, the two sat quiet and silent for a little while, thinking it over. Then Granny rose and said it was time for them to go to bed. She slowly took off her heavy wooden shoes, such as are worn in that country, and placed them beside the hearth. Gretchen looked thoughtfully at them for a minute or two, and then she said, "Granny, don't you think that somebody in all this wide world will think of us tonight?" "Nay, Gretchen," said Granny, "I don't think anyone will." "Well, then, Granny," said Gretchen, "the Christmas angels will, I know. So I'm going to take one of your wooden shoes and put it on the window sill outside, so that they may see it as they pass by. I'm sure the stars will tell the Christmas angels where the shoe is." "Ah, you foolish, foolish child," said Granny. "You are only getting ready for a disappointment. To-morrow morning there will be nothing whatever in the shoe. I can tell you that now." But little Gretchen would not listen. She only shook her head and cried out, "Oh, Granny, you don't talk enough to the stars." With this she seized the shoe, and opening the door, hurried out to place it on the window sill. It was very dark without, and something soft and cold seemed to gently kiss her hair and face. Gretchen knew by this that it was snowing, and she looked up to the sky, anxious to see if the stars were in sight. But a strong wind was tumbling the dark, heavy snow clouds about, and had shut away all else. "Never mind," said Gretchen softly to herself. "The stars are up there, even if I can't see them, and the Christmas angels do not mind snowstorms." Just then a rough wind went sweeping by the little girl, whispering something to her which she could not understand, and then it made a sudden rush up to the snow clouds, and parted them, so that the deep, mysterious sky appeared beyond, and shining down out of the midst of it was Gretchen's favourite star. "Ah, little star," said the child, laughing aloud, "I knew you were there, though I couldn't see you. will you whisper to the Christmas angels as they come by that little Gretchen wants so very much to have a Christmas gift tomorrow morning, if they have one to spare, and that she has put one of Granny's shoes upon the window sill, ready for it?" A moment more, and the little girl, standing on tiptoe, had reached the window sill and placed the shoe upon it, and was back again in the house beside Granny and the warm fire. The two went quietly to bed, and that night, as little Gretchen knelt to pray to the Heavenly Father, she thanked Him for having sent the Christ child into the world to teach all mankind how to be loving and unselfish, and in a few moments she was quietly sleeping, dreaming of the Christmas angels. The next morning, very early, even before the sun was up, little Gretchen was awakened by the sound of sweet music coming from the village. She listened for a moment, and then she knew that the choir boys were singing the Christmas carols in the open air of the village street. She sprang up out of bed and began to dress herself as quickly as possible, singing as she dressed. While Granny was slowly putting on her clothes, little Gretchen, having finished dressing herself, unfastened the door and hurried out to see what the Christmas angels had left in the old wooden shoe. The white snow covered everything, trees, stumps, roads, and pastures, until the whole world looked like fairyland. Gretchen climbed up on a large stone which was beneath the window, and carefully lifted down the wooden shoe. The snow tumbled off of it in a shower over the little girl's hands, but she did not heed that. She ran hurriedly back into the house, putting her hand into the toe of the shoe as she ran. "Oh, Granny! Oh, Granny!" she exclaimed. "You didn't believe the Christmas angels would think about us, but see, they have, they have! Here is a dear little bird nestled down in the toe of your shoe. Oh, isn't he beautiful?" Granny came forward and looked at what the child was holding lovingly in her hand. There she saw a tiny chickadee, whose wing was evidently broken by the rough and boisterous winds of the night before, and who had taken shelter in the safe, dry toe of the old wooden shoe. She gently took the little bird out of Gretchen's hands and skilfully bound his broken wing to his side, so that he need not hurt himself by trying to fly with it. Then she showed Gretchen how to make a nice warm nest for the little stranger, close beside the fire, and when their breakfast was ready she let Gretchen feed the little bird with a few moist crumbs. Later in the day Gretchen carried the fresh, green boughs to the old sick man by the mill, and on her way home stopped to see and enjoy the Christmas toys of some other children whom she knew, never once wishing that they were hers. When she reached home she found that the little bird had gone to sleep. Soon, however, he opened his eyes and stretched his head up, saying just as plain as a bird could say, "Now, my new friends, I want you to give me something more to eat." Gretchen gladly fed him again, and then, holding him in her lap, she softly and gently stroked his gray feathers until the little creature seemed to lose all fear of her. That evening Granny taught her a Christmas hymn and told her another beautiful Christmas story. Then Gretchen made up a funny little story to tell to the birdie. He winked his eyes and turned his head from side to side in such a droll fashion that Gretchen laughed until the tears came. As Granny and she got ready for bed that night, Gretchen put her arms softly around Granny's neck and whispered, "What a beautiful Christmas we have had today, Granny! Is there anything in the world more lovely than Christmas?" "Nay, child, nay," said Granny. "Not to such loving hearts as yours." End of Little Gretchen and the Wooden Shoe by Elizabeth Harrison. Story number 35 of the Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisa McCaslin, July 2012. Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists. Christmas on Big Rattle by Theodore Goodrich Roberts. Archer sat by the rude hearth of his Big Rattle camp, brooding in a sort of tired contentment over the spitting faggots of var and glowing coals of birch. It was Christmas Eve. He had been out on his snowshoes all that day, and all the day before, springing his traps along the streams and putting his deadfalls out of commission, Rather queer work for a trapper to be about. But Archer, despite all his gloomy manner, was really a sentimentalist who practised what he felt. Christmas is a season of peace on earth, he had told himself while demolishing the logs of a sinister deadfall with his axe, and now the remembrance of his quixotic deed added a brightness to the fire and to the rough, undecorated walls of the camp. Outside the wind ran high in the forest, breaking and sweeping tide-like over the reefs of tree-tops. The air was bitterly cold. Another voice, almost as fitful as the sough of the wind, sounded across the night. It was the waters of Stone Arrow Falls, above Big Rattle. The frosts had drawn their bonds of ice and blankets of silencing snow over all the rest of the stream, but the white and black face of the falls still flashed from a window in the great house of crystal and threw out a voice of desolation. Sacobie Bear, a full-blooded Micmac, uttered a grunt of relief when his ears caught the bellow of Stone Arrow Falls. He stood still and turned his head from side to side, questioningly. "Good," he said. "Big Rattle off there. Archer's camp over there. I go there. Good 'nough." He hitched his old smooth-bore rifle higher under his arm and continued his journey. Sacobie had tramped many miles, all the way from ice-imprisoned Fox Harbor. His papoose was sick. His squaw was hungry. Sacobie's belt was drawn tight. During all that weary journey his old rifle had not banged once, although few eyes save those of timberwolf and lynx were sharper in the hunt than Sacobie's. The Indian was reeling with hunger and weakness, but he held bravely on. A white man, no matter how courageous and sinewy, would have been prone in the snow by that time. But Sacobie, with his head down and his round snowshoes padding, like the feet of a frightened duck, raced with death toward the haven of Archer's cabin. Archer was dreaming of a Christmas time in a great far-away city when he was startled by a rattle of snowshoes at his threshold and a soft beating on his door, like weak blows from mittened hands. He sprang across the cabin and pulled open the door. A short, stooping figure shuffled in and reeled against him. A rifle in a woolen case clattered at his feet. "Mer' Christmas! How do?" said a weary voice. "Merry Christmas, brother," replied Archer. Then, "Bless me, but it's Sacobie Bear! Why, what's the matter, Sacobie?" "Heap tired, heap hungry," replied the Micmac, sinking to the floor. Archer lifted the Indian and carried him over to the bunk at the farther end of the room. He filled his iron pot spoon with brandy and inserted the point of it between Sacobie's unresisting jaws. Then he loosened the Micmac's coat and shirt and belt. He removed his moccasins and stockings and rubbed the straight, thin feet with brandy. After a while Sacobie Bear opened his eyes and gazed up at Archer. "Good," he said. "John Archer, he heap fine man, anyhow. Mighty good to poor Injun Sacobie, too. Plenty tobac, I s'pose? Plenty rum, too?" "No more rum, my son," replied Archer, tossing what was left in the mug against the log wall and corking the bottle. "And no smoke until you've had a feed. What do you say to bacon and tea? Or would tinned beef suit you better?" "Bacum," replied Sacobie. He hoisted himself to his elbow and wistfully sniffed the fumes of the brandy that came from the direction of his bare feet. "Heap waste of good rum, me tink," he said. "You ungrateful little beggar!" laughed Archer, as he pulled a frying pan from under the bunk. By the time the bacon was fried and the tea was steeped, Sacobie was sufficiently revived to leave the bunk and take a seat by the fire. He ate as all hungry Indians do, and Archer looked on in wonder and whimsical regret, remembering the miles and miles he had tramped with that bacon on his back. "Sacobie, you will kill yourself," he protested. "Sacobie no kill himself now," replied the Micmac, as he bolted a brown slice and a mouthful of hard bread. "Sacobie more like to kill himself when he empty. Want to live when he chock full. Good fun. T'ank you for more tea." Archer filled the extended mug and poured in the molasses. "Long sweetenin', they call it in that region." "What brings you so far from Fox Harbor this time of year?" inquired Archer. "Squaw sick. Papoose sick. Boat empty. One good bakum to eat." Archer smiled at the fire. "Any luck trapping?" he asked. His guest shook his head and hid his face behind the upturned mug. "Not much," he replied presently. He drew his sleeve across his mouth and then produced a clay pipe from a pocket in his shirt. "Tobac?" he inquired. Archer passed him a dark and heavy plug of tobacco. "Knife?" queried Sacobie. "Try your own knife on it," answered Archer, grinning. With a sigh Sacobie produced his sheath knife. "You tink Sacobie he big tief?" he said accusingly. "Knives are easily lost in people's pockets," replied Archer. The two men talked for hours. Sacobie Bear was a great gossip for one of his race. In fact, he had a Micmac nickname which, translated, meant "the man who deafens his friends with much talk." Archer, however, was pleased with his ready chatter and unforced humour. But at last they both began to nod. The white man made up a bed on the floor for Sacobie, with a couple of caribou skins and a heavy blanket. Then he gathered together a few plugs of tobacco, some tea, flour, and dried fish. Sacobie watched him with freshly aroused interest. "More tobac, please," he said. "Squaw he smokes, too." Archer added a couple of sticks of black leaf to the pile. "Bacum, too," said the Micmac. "Bacum better nor fish, anyhow." Archer shook his head. "You'll have to do with the fish," he replied, "but I'll give you a tin of condensed milk for the papoose." "Ah, ah, him good stuff!" exclaimed Sacobie. Archer considered the provisions for a second or two. Then going over to a dunnage bag near his bunk, he pulled its contents about until he found a bright red silk handkerchief and a red flannel shirt. Their colour was too gaudy for his taste. "These things are for your squaw," he said. Sacobie was delighted. Archer tied the articles into a neat pack and stood it in the corner, beside his guest's rifle. "Now you'd better turn in," he said, and blew out the light. In 10 minutes both men slept the sleep of the weary. The fire, a great mass of red coals, faded and flushed like some fabulous jewel. The wind washed over the cabin and fingered the caves, and brushed furtive hands against the door. It was dawn when Archer awoke. He sat up in his bunk and looked about the quiet, grey lighted room. Sacobie Bear was nowhere to be seen. He glanced at the corner by the door. Rifle and pack were both gone. He looked up at the rafters where his slab of bacon was always hung. It, too, was gone. He jumped out of his bunk and ran to the door. Opening it, he looked out. Not a breath of air stirred. In the east, saffron and scarlet broke the Christmas morning, and blue on the white surface of the world lay the imprints of Sacobie's round snowshoes. For a long time the trapper stood in the doorway in silence, looking out at the stillness and beauty. "Poor Sacobie," he said after a while. "Well, he's welcome to the bacon, even if it is all I had." He turned to light the fire and prepare breakfast. Something at the foot of his bunk caught his eye. He went over and took it up. It was a cured skin, a beautiful specimen of fox. He turned it over, and on the white hide an uncultured hand had written with a charred stick, "Archer." "Well, bless that old redskin!" exclaimed the trapper huskily. "Bless his puckered eyes! Who'd have thought that I should get a Christmas present?" End of Christmas on Big Rattle by Theodore Goodrich Roberts. End of The Children's Book of Christmas Stories by various artists.